Everything's a job, it turns out. Absolutely everything. I recently did some teaching at Drexel University, teaching writing, and the students were terrific, very engaged with the reading, very intelligent and insightful. It turns out that when you teach, you have to grade like hundreds of papers, Rich.
Right.
Did
they
you
don't
know
tell
that?
you that part.
No, you have to grade like so many papers. You have to read. I assigned a paper each week for 10 weeks, so it turns out I had over 100 of these things just to read.
Right.
And you're like, wait, I thought I was just being the cool teacher.
Right. Where's
and
the
imparting
Dead Poets
wisdom.
Society part?
Yeah, Dead Poets. We're just going to recite poems, man. Like, what do you mean grades? Like, what do you mean computer program? I had to learn this whole computer program.
When did you do that?
I'm technically still doing it.
Oh,
I
you
just
are?
have to finish the grades, which I have to completely understand this computer program, Rich, which I don't. And I think they've already graduated, so I need to get this done. But I'm here instead.
Well, you're a handwriting guy, right? Like you do all your writing in longhand, don't you?
I do. I wrote probably 75% of the book by hand.
That's amazing. Yeah, I heard you say something like you didn't even know what you had or how many words you had written or anything like that. You hadn't put the pieces together and realized that you had much more of a book than you originally thought because you've just been taking notes the whole time and jotting down your thoughts.
Well, I'm on planes a lot for Esquire and other magazines and newspapers I contribute to, and I'm on trains a lot. When I don't go into the city all the time, but when I do, from the Hudson Valley, I take the Metro North. I'm in public libraries a lot, and I'm at bars a lot, it turns out. And I bring along these just cheap paper notebooks you get at Walgreens or something, or Staples, and I start writing, almost like automatic writing. Like, let's just see where this goes. I'm just going to start and fill some pages with ink. And obviously, the chief benefit of that, I'm not on Instagram. I'm not on my phone. I turn off the phone, I turn off the laptop, and essentially force myself into a monastic circle of focus. And what I found with this book was I wrote a lot of it by hand, and I ended up with 80,000 words. I didn't know how much I'd written. I knew I'd filled a couple of notebooks, and my wife was terrified that I would lose the notebooks and have to start over.
The perils of the analog life.
Yeah, and guess what? I almost did in a couple airports. Yeah, I didn't tell her, but
God.
Disaster was averted, but the sweat beads on my forehead, my God, I was in a deep state of panic a couple times. But even then, I would just say, okay, I guess I'll write the Norway section now. Why not? I'm in the mood for Norway. I'll write the Bronx section now. And I didn't really know how the sections fit together until later when I started to put them into the laptop.
Do you write in the moment of experiencing it, or how much objectivity, time, and space do you need to put between you and the experience before you feel like you can, chronicle it in the best way possible?
That's a good question. There definitely needs to be some kind of delay. Some sort of lag deepens it, enriches your knowledge, and you have to almost lessen the energy a little bit so that you can look at it more clearly. It's very rare that I write about something right away. I would, like on a lot of the trips through Mexico with René Redzepi, I would take a lot of notes, just sit at the back of the van essentially and capture what everyone was saying for days on end, and then come home and sort of process it.
You don't tape record though, because you have these long quotes. You have this recollection of these conversations.
They're just written down.
Yeah,
they're written down in notebooks. I do occasionally record, but for I spent weeks with the Noma team. You can't record weeks and weeks. You just end up with endless files that you can't do anything with. So we had a fact checker on it, Tim Hodler. So he got back to everyone, and in fact, René Redzepi's wife, Nadine, gave me an interesting compliment. She was like, so I'm talking to the fact checker and it's uncanny. Like you completely recreated entire conversations we had. And I was like, okay, are they accurate? She's like, they're precisely what we said. And I was like, okay, whew, that's what I want. That's a compliment. If I'm unclear about something, I just didn't include it. I only included the passages that I was clear on. That's what the conversation was, and the quotes were precise and everything.
Right. Sometimes
at the end of the day, because one's handwriting can be messy, I will type the notes into the laptop, not as a written document, but just so that the quotes...
Make sure you have it accurate.
Yeah, because 2 weeks later, it might just look like scrawls. But I find that there's more continuity to writing by hand. Mm-hmm. You know, you sort of snap out of this trance after 4 or 5 hours. You're like, wow, I filled a lot of pages. And there seems to be a different kind of flow from that.
Well, you don't seem like someone who gets easily blocked. I mean, you're incredibly
it doesn't seem
prolific.
Like that.
I mean, the number of articles, sheer number of articles that you've written is insane.
It is.
And I know there's tons that even aren't online.
Oh, yeah. There's an entire decade that's not online. The entire decade I wrote for Details magazine that, from an online standpoint, does not exist. And frankly, that was the best work I did. But you can't, I mean, I have it in my garage in boxes if anyone wants to see.
Why didn't it ever get put online?
Because Details folded and Condé Nast, I believe, shut down the site. And so there's simply no way to access those stories. I mean, I did a Tom Cruise cover story, a Keanu Reeves cover story.
I remember that.
That may be my finest moment.
All I remember about that is something about Book Soup and like the search for a sandwich.
Search for a sandwich.
Yeah.
Yeah, we went to Book Soup. We talked about Proust. We talked about Updike. And then we went looking for this sandwich in Santa Monica.
Right. Bay Cities.
It's got the lettuce, the shredded lettuce.
And he lurks around Book Soup late at night, right? Like he's a frequent customer.
The guy is a deep dude and a deep reader.
Did you see the thing he said on Colbert the other day?
No.
Colbert asked him something about, he said, Keanu, what is the meaning of life? And I'll paraphrase because I don't remember exactly what he said, but there was a long pause and he said, all I know is that when you're gone, the people who love you will miss you. And it was like this mic drop moment of deep profundity.
All religions boil down to that. All belief systems encapsulated in Keanu's cone there.
Well, his myth has never been, deeper or richer than it is now.
I feel like I was maybe ahead of the curve because my Keanu profile and Details was like 2007, 2008. And I was sort of, arguing for the depth and importance of Keanu Reeves as icon at a time when he was a little bit marginalized. His star had dimmed a bit, you know? And I was like, let's reconsider Keanu, poet, philosopher. And not in a joking way. I mean, he is incredibly literate and thoughtful when you meet him, and sensitive. He's a really cool guy. But anyway, you can't read that right now. I mean, if your listeners want to read it, I can find a way to post it somewhere.
You should, I mean, do you own those stories now that it's defunct? You could have somebody type them up and put them on Medium or something.
Yeah, it'd be fun. I mean, there was a piece about the Wedge Crew, which was it still is a gang of sort of rogue body surfers down in Orange County. They surf a wave called the Wedge.
Yeah, famous wave.
Yeah, destructive.
Crashes right on top of you.
Yeah, they don't even, they're body surfers. You can't even have surfboards in there because they'll impale people. I wrote about them. I got them to talk. They were like Fight Club. They wouldn't talk. And I have roots in that part of California and got them to talk. And actually, some friends of mine from high school were in the Wedge Crew. I wrote about a mafia lawyer. I wrote about a contortionist. I wrote about a guy who repaired broken sex dolls. Sex dolls get broken. We don't want to get into the details.
Onto that story.
A lot of it is desperation. Your editor will come around like, come on, what do you got cooking? What's next? And you're like, I don't know. And so you start Googling madly, talking to people. I think I do remember this. I did some sort of event, a reading or something in Nevada, of course. It would have to be Nevada or Florida.
Yeah. It's like a classic Florida man story.
And somebody said to me, how do you come up with articles? How do you come up with story ideas? And I said, it's in I believe in the universe. It sends me signals. Like, I'm a Californian. I believe this. I talk like this. And she said, if I come up with a story idea for you on the spot, like, you can owe me dinner or something like that when I come to New York. Or I was like, okay, nobody ever wins at this, but let's give it a go. She's like, I know a guy in Northern California who's the only person in America who can repair broken sex dolls. And I was like, where do you want to go to dinner? That's a sure thing.
It's irresistible.
That's an amazing story. Is this a real individual? She's like, yeah, his name's Slade Fierro.
Of course.
Of course that's his Fierro. Name. And guess what? He had been in a parachuting what do they call it when you jump out of planes with a parachute?
Parachuting.
Airdropping, whatever it is when people do that.
Skydiving.
Thank you. He had been in an accident with that and had really hurt his spine. And so he walked in this kind of serpentine, contorted way. He was fairly, severely disabled from this accident. And so there was this interesting poetic connection, actually, between the work he did on the dolls and his own body having been hurt from this crash. So as often happened with my stories at Details and elsewhere, it started as a lark. It's just like guy who repairs sex dolls. And it actually ended up becoming a deeper piece about the human body and about the way this gentleman would work with these dolls in an almost cathartic or therapeutic way regarding himself. Believe it or not.
Wow. He
was a pretty deep dude.
Yeah, because it sounds like a character from a David Fincher movie.
David Fincher or David Lynch.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
One of the Davids, one of the weird Davids.
Yeah.
But those were good times, and none of those, you can't find those stories online. So
what was Cruise like?
Oh, wow. Tom Cruise was like this. I'm looking right, like he doesn't blink. He's like looking right at you. And so I did a piece pegged to The Last Samurai, which is one of his movies. And, it was all, he wanted to do something connected to Japanese culture. And so we went to Urasawa. Urasawa is like, one of the really
super
high-end omakase places. Yeah. And the fact is, it was in some ways one of my first pieces of food writing, because the whole piece was about the meal at this restaurant and how Tom didn't actually eat it. So he kept talking about he's smitten with Japanese culture and he's obsessed, and he had these books. He'd brought a backpack full of books of samurai quotes and haikus and Buddhist wisdom and all this stuff, which I'm all about. I was into that. But, I was like, on the other hand, Japanese culture is right here in front of us being presented by these artists.
This is a part of that.
It's right here. And Japanese culture is sort of lined up on the runway like planes at LaGuardia waiting to get eaten here. So, and he was like, oh no, I'm not that hungry. And I was like, okay, well, I'm eating it. So I ate 2 omakase meals because there was this chawan mushi, which is kind of like a custard, and it had flakes of edible gold on top.
Wow.
And I kept going like, Tom, you going to eat that? You're going to eat the custard? You going to eat your pudding? And he finally, in one big slurp, took a spoon and just slurped down the chawan mushi in the gold. So the end was him eating gold.
Wow.
Oh,
of course, man. Everything I've heard about that guy is that he's everything that you want him to be. He's hyper present. He's completely focused on the person that he's talking to in a way that's, that sort of transcends being a human being, like in an alien sort of fashion. Yeah.
You're wondering, like, does he break? Can he be broken? Can I knock him off track here?
He's definitely not aging.
He's not aging. He is not just mentally focused on the conversation, but physically focused. There is a sense of, like he would grab me on the shoulder to make a point and squeeze hard, even hurt a little bit. Like he's strong, and I'd be like, let go, Tom. Let go of my shoulder.
There was a meme that went around the internet recently. It was a picture of Wilford Brimley from Cocoon.
We've went from Tom Cruise to Wilford Brimley. I love that.
But the joke was, this picture of Wilford Brimley. He's the same age as Tom Cruise is now.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
That's heavy.
I know, right?
Well, you guys are aging backwards here.
I don't know about that.
You're like Benjamin Button.
We're just we're fighting gravity here. We're doing the best that we can. Which kind of brings us to how we met. I mean, we met a couple of years ago. You came here to interview us for a piece that you were writing for the New York Times. You were exploring veganism, and I remember being kind of equal parts delighted by you, and also a little bit trepidatious, like, okay, this guy's not like some blogger. Like, this is the New York Times. Like, this could go either way. Like, I had this terror that you were going to write this piece that was going to be, snark filled and kind of, use us as comedic fodder for something.
Very, very easy to do that. And I don't I can't think of many examples in my career where I've decided to take that route. I don't think it's fair to people. I have this terrible blind spot as a journalist that I see human beings as human beings. Sue me. But and I enjoyed talking to you guys. You've thought it through. You had an intelligent viewpoint. And frankly, I love writing about veganism, and I love writing about the people who are passionate about it. And I think the movement behind it and the growth of it over the last 10, 20 years is quite intoxicating and exhilarating to see. I don't like to write about a system of eating or looking at the world like that in a snarky way. I don't think that's fair to people, particularly when they're giving you their time. Also, maybe your listeners don't know that I live here now. As soon as I came to the house, I loved it so much that I never moved.
You've been here ever since.
Yeah, I've lived here for years now.
We're finally let you out.
Rich adopted me. So that shows you how much I like these people. No, I mean, it was a beautiful experience, You have to really ask yourself some hard questions especially these days with social media, about how far you want to go with mockery. I mean, I honestly think the politicians are fair game, but beyond that, how much you want to contribute toxicity to the world and negativity. Criticism is one thing, but just sort of like there's a way in which snarkiness tips very quickly into bullying. Like a kind of form of bullying.
But do you feel
now all journalists hate me for saying that?
Yeah, but I mean, there's a sort of built-in pressure into the clickbait nature and the manner in which business is done in terms of online journalism that I would imagine puts pressure on journalists to come up with the hot take or the crazy headline, the clickbait headline, and snark works. It gets clicks. Yeah. It gets eyeballs.
Get you followers on Twitter.
Is that part of the conversation when you're, sitting with the editors that you work with, or how does that work in your own?
No, I've been blessed with some really wonderful editors who are basically like, do your thing, write the pieces that reflect what you believe is happening in the culture, whether it's the food culture that I cover now or music or film.
Right.
I don't get pressure to crank out hot takes. No.
Yeah.
I did do a hot take that went live today.
Did you? What was that?
Yeah. Is it okay that it's about burrata, which is like...
I saw that. Yeah. Like, fuck you and your burrata or something like that. Well, yeah, and it's not, Do you come up with the titles too?
No, I didn't really. I might have just said that informally, and it ended up being the headline. But I don't write the headlines. They had an extra page in the summer issue. This is essentially what happened. They had an extra page, and they're like, there's something you want to just riff on? And I travel around the country all year going to restaurants all over the country and the world. And in part, that's research for our best bars issue package that came out this summer, and the best new restaurants that comes out at the end of the year. It's a lot of eating. It's kind of punitive amount of eating. It's not a healthy enterprise, let me tell you, Rich. But you get weary of things you see on every menu. You're in Minneapolis, you're in Dallas, you're in San Francisco, you're in Atlanta, and you see burrata everywhere. And you just start to loathe the cliche of that. Burrata itself, whether it's a dairy version or a non-dairy version, is a delicious thing. Okay, I'm not opposed to the deliciousness. It's just like if you saw bands using the same chords over and over, or using the same drum sound, right? Which happened a lot in the 80s. Or you have authors mimicking each other or using a certain voice in their writing that strikes you as shop-worn.
It's just tired and derivative.
Yeah, I just don't, like, why is burrata on this menu? It's there for a simple reason. People order it, they pay for it, it'll sell. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just thought I'm a little weary of it. But, dude, people hate the hate. Like, the hate feeds the hate. I made the mistake of going on Facebook just moments before I parked here, and all these people are like, well, fuck him. Oh, my God, so many people. I was like, no, what did I do? Like, am I just, like, pouring toxins into the water supply here? Like, maybe I should have just left burrata alone. I didn't even name any chefs. I mean, so it's not like I'm attacking anybody by name, but...
part of that is driven by the title of the piece. Like when you read it, it's not exactly as snarky as the title would imply. And what you see in magazine publishing more increasingly is the difference between the title of the piece in the online version versus the title in print? Because in print, you don't need to grab people in the same way.
Yeah, this is a good question and very perceptive from a media standpoint. Like I did a piece on this chef, Francis Mallmann, who's down in Argentina. Well, he's traveling all over the world, but I interviewed him on this island in Patagonia. And in print, the headline was some Led Zeppelin-like, old school Esquire thing, like in the land of fire and ice, and you can almost imagine that Led Zeppelin song where they're like, Valhalla. And then in print, it says like, is Francis Mallmann the most interesting chef in the world?
Right.
Okay. I didn't write that. I don't even really agree with it. It's meant to be, I suspect, a nod toward that Dos Equis ad with the most interesting man in the world. And so there's an element of satire to it. But that headline alone brought so much spite upon the piece. Like the way that you take a stance like that, it draws eyeballs, but it also draws
ire.
Yes, well done. So I understand it from an SEO standpoint and everything. I understand they don't want these stories to vanish, and if they put something too nuanced as the headline, people just keep clicking, I guess. But
people would probably know Francis Mallmann from Chef's Table.
That's
There's
right.
An amazing episode on him. He's one of the most influential chefs on Julie, and he was kind of the original core impetus to us doing these retreats and the Italian cookbook that Julie put together.
No way.
Because not so much the fire part of what he does, but more the kind of traveling gypsy, travel the world and take your crew with you and set up shop and have an experience that brings your expertise to a different region and welcomes the expertise of that region into it. And that was really the spirit. Like we wanted to take what we do and go to different places of the world and collaborate with the local chefs there. And we've kind of done that in Italy, and a book came out of that.
Right.
The idea was broader, though. We're going to go to all these places, but we're so busy. We just keep going back to Italy.
Yeah.
But she just absolutely loves Mallmann.
That's amazing. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I did not. That's Mallmann's next book is apparently a vegetable cookbook.
Oh, is it?
He's obviously intensely associated with meat, but he himself seems to be moving away from that.
Right. That's interesting.
It's really interesting considering his philosophy.
Jeff, the world is moving away from meat.
Well, I suspect that is true.
Yeah.
I suspect that is true.
We kind of have to.
I mean, the Chef's Table I was associated with, and the thing I'm sort of the only thing I'm recognized on the street for now and then is the John Guan episode of Chef's Table that I appear in. Although I look much better with the lighting they had. So sometimes people are like, are you the John Guan guy, or did you just get really old and fat? I'm like, no, I'm him. I'm just don't actually look that good.
Well, a couple. First of all, put that aside. But I remember when you came to our house to spend time with us for that New York Times piece, you had just returned from South Korea having that experience with her, and you were telling us about it, and neither of us had heard of her. I didn't know anything about her. And you were just going on and on about what an extraordinary, incredible experience this was. And then a couple weeks after the piece that you wrote about us and kind of veganism, the piece that you wrote on John Guan about that experience was in T Magazine.
That's right.
It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. And the photographs were just exquisite. I mean, that must have, yes, being in Chef's Table, but that article was really something remarkable.
Well, that article is why the Chef's Table happened.
Right.
David Gelb would admit that. I mean, a lot of Western readers and viewers were not familiar with John Guan until that piece. So,
explain her for people that are listening.
She is a Buddhist nun at a monastery in South Korea. She's not a formally trained chef. She doesn't have a restaurant. So she's the only person who's appeared in Chef's Table with that kind of background. Her ethos is temple cuisine, which is a form of cooking that's been around for centuries and is associated with Buddhist temples throughout Asia, not just Korea. There's different manifestations of it throughout Asia. And it's a vegan cuisine. And everything that's used is from the surrounding landscape, with the exception of the rice. I mean, they bought the rice. But mushrooms, herbs, leaves, vegetables, fruits, all these things that are plucked at the moment of freshness. I mean, literally, we were in the garden and she's plucking things that she brings up to the kitchen and starts cooking moments later. Maybe she serves them raw. Maybe she cooks them in these bamboo tubes. And then other things are vegan and are products of nature, but are products of time. So there are things that are extremely fresh of the moment, and other things that are like a soy sauce or gochujang, or a bean paste, doenjang, that could be 10 years old, 30 years old, even 100 years old. They're the people in the monastery are sort of custodians of these sauces for generations, and they have such depth of flavor and stuff. And to me, obviously, everyone should know by now that vegan cooking can be incredibly delicious and creative. I mean, that's a given now. We know all about cashew butters and all the different ways you can use different fats. But these aged sauces in Korea up the ante. I mean, there's nothing more flavorful than that. There's nothing richer in a way than some of these sauces. Yeah. And she'd just kind of brush a grilled vegetable with this, a mushroom, wrap it in a leaf and brush it with one of these sauces. And your eyes would roll back in your head. It was like the most delicious thing. Eric Ripert from Le Bernardin, he and I went together. And at the end of a few days, we were like, I've never felt better in my life.
Right.
So.
But just also on top of that, the incredible kind of patience and mindfulness and artistry and care that this woman puts into every meal that she makes. Like everything that she does, there's this intention behind it that
absolutely
is sort of brought forth in the flavor and the presentation of her food.
People talk about such and such chef putting love into the food, and it's kind of a cliche in the food world. But she does intentionally pour love and bodhicitta, like good vibes and good intentions into each dish, into each ingredient with prayers. I mean, she actually prays over the food, and she thinks about who's going to be eating it, and she offers it up as a gift to them and a way of communicating. I mean, it's very moving.
Yeah.
And it does make you wonder, if it has an effect, not just on the deliciousness, but how you feel. And we were also, I've actually spent a lot of time with the Dharma. I spent many years in meditation and studying the Dharma and stuff. So I have some background in it, and always find myself drawn back to it. Similar to with vegetarian or vegan eating, it's funny. I think if some day comes, and I'm not just saying this to flatter you.
Are you patronizing me and the audience?
I'm not just trying to win fans on the show. I've said this to many people that if the time comes when I'm no longer officially working as a food writer and having to eat everything, I have to eat everything for my job.
Yeah, you go to these restaurants, you order everything.
I have to.
Yeah.
I sort of nibble it and sip it. I can't possibly drink all the drinks I post on Instagram. I would be in deep trouble. But I would love to go vegan and give it a go. I really would, because I have had weeks at a time when I did, and I feel extraordinarily better. And so
I think I heard you say when you were doing the story on us and the kind of movement, the vegan movement, that you didn't write about it, but that you actually you did go vegan for that period of time.
Yeah, I did for another story involving Kathy Freston and
and Dan.
Well, that's actually a different one, the Dan Buettner one. I did an earlier one about veganism gaining in popularity at restaurants, and even restaurants that serve meat and stuff would have vegan options in Los Angeles because so many customers expected it, right? And Tal Ronan at Crossroads, of course, I interviewed. And so I decided it's only right to go vegan for a week, go fully plant-based. I mean, at least from that, within that framework of a week or 10 days, it's kind of undeniable that you feel better. Yeah. I don't know if that's true after months. I've never gone that long.
I'm at 12 years. I still feel
12
good.
Years. Yeah. Yeah, and you look 22, so
not quite, man. I grew the beard out; it's pretty white, man.
Yeah, I know. The beard is.
We're all gonna die, dude.
The beard is the tell. Like that's the thing. I keep growing my whiskers out. It's not even a beard, and you're like, oh, I'm Santa Claus,
right? Well, we're like the same age. You grew up in San Marino, right?
Yeah, I tried to hide.
Where'd you go to high school?
San Marino High School.
Did you?
Yeah.
What year
and I
did
was
you
on
graduate?
the swim team.
Were you?
Yeah, man. We could have swum
Holy
against
shit! Did
each
we
other.
talk about this?
We did briefly, but you were in the Olympics or something.
No. I wasn't that good. Did you know Kurt Crochet?
Very well.
You're kidding me. Did we talk about this?
A little bit. He went to Stanford, right?
Yeah, he's one of my best friends from school.
Yeah, he was on my team. Because San Marino High School was one of the great swim dynasties in California. You know, it's funny because I live in New York. It means nothing to anyone.
Right.
Sorry, I'm bumping the mic. I'm getting so excited. But, no one ever asked me about swimming. It's like, I describe it to people, it's like being in Texas and playing football. Like, it was a huge deal in my school to be on the swim team and the water polo team. Right. And, Mission Viejo, everybody thinks about. But San Marino was a powerhouse.
Yeah, it was.
We had Bert Canner and Tom Schmidt as our coaches. Tom Schmidt was, he was nuts. He was intense. We used to have these board drills. Do you ever do that? Do you water polo too?
No, I never played. I grew up East Coast. I'm from Washington, D.C., so I didn't grow up in a swimming.
My accent is getting Californian as I talk about this, but in water polo season, which was Tom Schmidt at San Marino, if you made a mistake in practice, you had to do a board drill, which meant you had to climb up to the top, the highest diving board. Of course, in your Speedo, which is totally humiliating in and of itself, and jump off while everybody on the team threw a water polo ball at you. Just abusive.
So just getting pegged on the way down.
Yeah, Jason Rothbard broke his nose one time. Like, it was brutal, So I made a lot of mistakes. I wasn't that coordinated. So, I mean, at one point with swimming, I don't know what happened with you, but with you're swimming now, I swam at Princeton too.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
For Rob.
Yeah, for Rob Orr, who's retiring now.
I thought about going there. I like Rob a lot. Yeah,
he's a great guy. Yeah. But one day I went into Rob. And of course, I trudged through the snow to Jadwin Gym or whatever the gym was where our pool was. And for some reason, I was being stridently Californian. I refused to wear snow boots, so I was wearing like Vans in the snow, and I'm freezing. It's 5:30 in the morning, morning workouts.
Right.
Get there. Smelled the chlorine, and something clicked. And I was like, Rob,
I'm done.
I'm out.
Yeah.
He was like, what, you don't feel good? And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I've been doing this since I was 7 years old. The chlorine, I can't take it. I can't go back and forth in this pool anymore. I'm losing my mind. I've never had a beer. This is crazy. I'm in college. I've never partied. I just, what is my life? He's like, okay, relax. I wasn't that important to the team, so this was not an emergency. I was like the third sprinter. I was not a crucial cog on the team, but he's a good guy. He was like, just relax. It'll be, but I never went back. I actually never went back. I couldn't do it anymore. I did start running and stuff, but I recently tried to swim in a pool in a hotel in Detroit when I was there to check out restaurants. Ooh, it was painful.
That was not good.
Oh, my God. 16 laps, I about wanted to conk out.
So you were then you would know Dan Veach and Jim Tuckler?
Veach was on my team at Princeton.
Yeah.
Yeah, Veach, I remember vividly.
I grew up with those guys. I've known those guys my whole life. Yeah.
Veach is a class act.
Great guy. I'm still in touch with him. I talk to him from time to time. Yeah.
I couldn't talk to him because he was lapping me all the time. He was moving so quickly.
he's a brilliant talent. He went to the Olympics. Yeah. He's incredible. And when we were kids at summer league swim meets, he was the guy who at age all of 15 or 14 or whatever would be going up to every, where the parents are the timers and it's like summer league or whatever, introducing himself to every parent, shaking their hand. I was like, this guy's going to be president.
Yeah.
You could tell then, he's a big banker now in San Francisco.
Is that what he does?
And Jim Tuckler lives in Chicago and still does masters and breaks all these masters world. He still looks looks like he's 21.
You know who really wants me to start swimming again?
Who's that?
My wife.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm just putting it out there. I really like a swimmer's body. I mean, to me, that's the ideal. I was like, as opposed to a food writer's body, you're saying? What's the difference?
You could keep these things in balance that way.
Balance. One of these days, I'm going to get to balance. There's a scene in Hungry, my book, that's about the workout that René Redzepi does every morning.
Yeah, I read about that. It sounds pretty intense.
It was awful. And I'm so out of shape now, and I barely do anything. I just walk, really, if even that. And it involves a lot of burpees, and it's kind of like his cooking is new Nordic, like it's like radical naturalism, and his workout is radical naturalism too. It's almost primitive. It's like just run back and forth really quickly. Now scuttle around like a crab. Now climb up this tree. Now try to slap the other guy's knee, and if he slaps your knee first, you have to do 10 burpees. I mean, I do one burpee and I thought I was having a stroke. So it was really hard.
Yeah, there's a parallel between his hyper-local cuisine and his interest in sustainability and all of these things with he's not going to a gym or, putting on a GPS watch. Like, he's using what he finds in his backyard.
Yeah, I mean, I would travel through Mexico with them, and him and Thomas Frabel in particular, one of the members of his team, is in wicked shape and everything. Like, they would just put a rope over a tree branch and start, like, doing pull-ups on it. They would just do that for the hell of it. I was like, I will never do that.
Have you ever heard of the Happy Pair? Here's a story for you.
Yeah.
You know these guys?
I could pretend.
They're twins. They're these twins. They're identical twins. They're like the most identical of identical twins. They have their DNA tested. Like, it's the most identical.
They're the same person.
Yeah, basically they are. They finish each other's sentences, literally. And they live in Greystones, Ireland, which is like an hour south of Dublin.
Oh.
And they started this veg shop that became a plant-based cafe. And now they're really the face of kind of healthy living and eating in Ireland, and it's quickly kind of spreading out across the world. They were kind of adopted by Jamie Oliver, and he sort of introduced them to the world through his YouTube channel. And now they have like 3 or 4 cookbooks. They're all #1 bestsellers in the UK, and they've got YouTube and all this kind. I've had them on the podcast a bunch, and I visited them in Greystones a couple times, and they kind of visit us on our retreats in Italy. We were just with them a couple weeks ago, and they've created this movement where now people migrate to this little village in Ireland, in Greystones, to just catch a glimpse of them and eat a meal at their cafe. And they do this thing every morning called Swimrise, where at the crack of fuck, whenever the sun comes up.
We can swear on this podcast.
Yeah.
You just,
as soon as the sun comes up, they go jump in the Irish Sea, 365 days a year, every day, January, February, whenever. And it started with just them and a couple other friends. And now literally hundreds of people show up every morning, and they drive or they fly to just have this experience with them. And it's pretty cool what they've created. Like, they really have created this movement that's very populist and inclusive around healthy eating and living. And they also work out in the same way that Redzepi does. Like, they just use what's around them to kind of, and they're doing it like throughout the day. Hey, I have 10 minutes. I'm going to go, I'm going to do some handstands or whatever it is. And they're just constantly moving, super high energy dudes.
Amazing.
Yeah. You should check these guys out.
I would like to. It's funny with René Redzepi, a lot of his menu is foraged ingredients, from the wild, or herbs and beach grasses and whatnot you didn't even know were edible, and in fact are often highly nutritious. And his workout and the foraging are similar in the sense that they're free.
Right.
I mean,
it's just there.
It's just there. You don't have to pay a store for it. You don't have to pay a gym. I think that his philosophy is inspiring and is influential, but it's also cheap.
Right. Unless you're eating it at Noma.
He's getting extremely high-end ingredients that are flown in from Norway and the Faroe Islands and everything. But a lot of his other ingredients are either fermented things that they just make on their own that take years, and things that are foraged. And he's very different. One of the things I'm trying to communicate to people who've heard about this book is when they hear about chefs, they tend to think about excess. They tend to think about truffles and caviar and that kind of champagne.
Indulgences.
A meal at Noma is really not about that. There is a sense of luxury in that you're being taken care of. There are bites that are extraordinarily delicious, but it's very much a break from that fatty, excessive kind of cooking. And in fact, the menu that's about to drop at the end of this month, at the end of over the summer, is the Plant Kingdom menu. So they have 3 main menus at Noma. In the sort of winter, the colder months, it's a seafood menu, and in the fall, it's sort of a wild game menu. But the main menu for the sort of middle of the year is Plant Kingdom, and it's all vegetables and fruits and herbs and roots and things like that are offered in just an exceptionally delicious way. I showed you a picture before.
Beforehand, you showed me this image on Instagram of one of the dishes, a plate, and it was the most beautiful presentation of food I've ever seen.
Yeah, and not cliched, not those swoops and dashes and little anthills of powder, like just these vegetables and herbs and flowers, presented as they are in their natural beauty, probably brushed with some beautiful fermented sauce. But you can leave Noma feeling quite light, and feeling quite healthy. And it's not some 5-hour endurance test either. I mean, it tends to go pretty quickly, and they just make you feel good, and the food makes you feel good.
Right.
It's part of why I've kept going back. I've now eaten there 6 times. It'll be my 7th time in a few weeks. It's because it's always different. And they kind of just blow up the menu every few months and create something entirely new.
Well, let's contextualize this whole thing a little bit.
Sorry, I went.
Yeah, no, it's cool. But so
I'm not trying to force it.
You've got this book, Hungry, and it's essentially part memoir, part adventure story.
Yeah.
Seen through the lens of René Redzepi, who's heralded as the greatest chef in the world as a result of this restaurant Noma that he has in Copenhagen. And he's known for his, like we said earlier, being hyper local and this network of foragers that bring him these amazing ingredients. And he has this, genius touch when it comes to creating new and different kinds of flavors. And this restaurant, Noma, became this crazy phenomenon. But what drew you to this guy as a story? Like why write a book about René Redzepi? Like, how did this whole thing come together?
I love that Leaves of Grass is right in front of me. I'm just going to point that out.
Yeah, you want to read it? You can.
Oh, don't.
We can.
Don't
read
tempt
excerpts
me.
from that.
Your audience doesn't want that. No, I would do it, but
Well, you are a poet.
No, I write about poems,
that.
but I 5 years ago, almost exactly 5 years ago, I met René Redzepi. I was in a dark period in my own life. I was extremely depressed. I was in the middle of a marital separation, and I had just moved into a crummy little bachelor apartment. No matter how you slice it, divorce is brutal, and it was a sad time. There were a lot of tears. There was a lot of gnawing on the past and guilt, and into this moment, I checked my email, and it was about a week later, maybe 10 days later. Into this moment, René Redzepi appears through an operative at Phaidon, who was a publishing house that was putting out some of his books. They were like, René's going to be in New York. He wants to meet you. The greatest chef in the world wants to meet you, Rich. So I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm busy. I don't want to hear this guy. I don't want to sit down and have him prattle on to me about his manifesto and like, the thing about the New Nordic movement is we believe. I'm just like, I don't have the bandwidth. I just want to go home. It makes no sense from a journalistic standpoint, but the deadlines at the New York Times are crushing. You're always deadline. When I was working on a piece about you, I was probably working on 10 other pieces at the same time. And in fact, I'd just come back from Korea for junk. So I was exhausted, but I said yes anyway, because we'll see. Whatever.
Right.
Curiosity.
And why do you think that he sought you out?
I'm not sure. That question keeps coming up.
And you'd written some semi-critical things about him
I think
prior to that.
He liked my writing maybe, but I had written a piece for the New York Times sort of mocking the New Nordic movement in New York, its manifestations in New York. And I think he has a way of identifying obstructions and reaching out to those obstructions and perhaps pulling them into his orbit. I met a guy in Detroit who had worked at Noma, Mexico, one of the Noma pop-ups. And I said, do you ever get the sense that René Redzepi is kind of like a benevolent cult leader? And this guy hit the floor laughing. He's like, you just fucking nailed it. That is it. He's like a cult leader. Like, you can't resist. He's extremely charismatic, and he has this extreme sense of mission. It's a little like Tom Cruise we were talking about before. He's focused on you. He has so many profound things to say about nature and food and the environment and his own life story. And you're just kind of captivated. Not everyone has that degree of focus and communication and that kind of weird energy. I felt like I was meeting David Bowie in the 70s or Bob Dylan in the 60s or Steve Jobs in the 80s.
Yeah,
or Beyonce now. Like, I felt like I was meeting somebody absolutely catalytic in the culture.
Or David Byrne.
Absolutely. David Byrne, who's a reference in the book. Because actually, all the chapters are named after Talking Heads songs. So I was like, wow, this guy, I see why he's the best chef in the world. I mean, he's completely catalytic leader. And he was like, oh, you're an LA guy, because I grew up out here, and he's like, you like tacos? I said, what the fuck? You talk. Of course, I like. What, you're from Denmark.
You talk to me about tacos.
You can talk to me about tacos. I concede. I am not from Mexico, but let me tell you something. I grew up with a Yucatecan restaurant down the street. I could have told you about Cochinita Pibil when I was 15. Like, yeah, let's talk tacos, Mr. Copenhagen. Mm-hmm. But guess what? He was like, yeah, that's awesome. Like, you and I should go through Mexico on a taco trip. And it's like, what? Sure. I mean, that's not going to happen. What are you talking about?
Right.
Like,
just throwing that out there.
Sorry, I keep hitting the mic. Sorry, listeners. But I was like, there's no budget for that. And so it turns out that he's very persuasive in that cult leader way. He's very persistent. And he would text me, he would email me, how's the Mexico trip coming along? And I was like, there is no Mexico trip, René. Let it go, But he come on, we should go. It'll be fun. One time, it's a true story. This is not in the book, but I was in an elevator with Whitney Vargas, who was a former editor of mine at Details magazine. Great person, great editor. And she said, what are you working on? I said, Whit, I'm not working on the best story ever. I'm supposed to go through Mexico with René Redzepi. She's like, the Noma guy, the greatest chef in the world guy? I was like, yeah, he's like obsessed with Mexico. He wants to go on a travel piece, taco quest. She's like, we'll do it. You can do it for T Magazine. And I was like, what? Yeah. She's like, we'll send you an agreement or something. And I was like, okay. The elevator gets off. There's like the elevator pitch, Right. So I get off of the 6th floor, walk back down to the 4th floor where I worked, texted René. I was like, looks like we're going to Mexico. And he's like, I know. He's like, I knew this would happen.
Yeah.
That's how he is. Like, he won't take no for an answer. You have that, you feel like you're being coaxed, but in a good way. And so then after a while, I did that piece, but then after a while, I just went to Noma on my own, spent my own money. I went with Lauren, who's now my wife. I went with my friend Ian. I would just, they would just, a little blurb would happen on my text or my emails, like, you have a reservation at Noma, take it or leave it. At a certain point, I was like, I do not have the money for this. I do not have the time for this. I do not have the emotional bandwidth for this. Let's do it.
Right.
Let's just say yes. Let's go to Sydney. Let's go to Copenhagen again. And it started to become intoxicating. It was like I was self-medicating with Noma,
Right. This is a way, like, in many ways, the book is about, it sounds trite to say midlife crisis, but
I'm
about,
expecting
it's about like, how do you navigate a difficult time? It's about reinvention. It's about, not being afraid to, face difficult challenges and embracing like the unknown, which
absolutely
is happening in your own life and is mirrored in the experience that Redzepi is having with trying to, continually reinvent himself.
Yeah, what dovetailed nicely was that my life was in flux and I was adrift, and his life, not so much in flux, but he was sort of blowing it up. He had this restaurant, Noma, which seen almost unanimously as the most influential restaurant in the world. So he decided to close it.
Right.
And tear it down and build a brand new Noma on what looked like an abandoned junk heap in Chernobyl. Like, I can't tell you how unlikely.
It's like Dylan going electric.
Dude, thank you. It is like that's what it's supposed to be. Like, I think the Dylan documentary, Don't Look Back, was in some ways a model for what I wanted to do. The one with D.A. Pennebaker made, When We Were Kings with Muhammad Ali.
Right.
These documentaries that capture a pivotal figure in culture at a pivotal moment in his or her path, right? And I thought, I have that path. I have it. I have access. He's closing the original Noma, building a new one. It's an impossible task. It's like something out of a Werner Herzog movie. Right. Meanwhile, he's doing this pop-up in the jungle. He's doing a pop-up in Australia. He's got this whole wild food initiative in Denmark. He's got 3 children. His life is nuts.
Yeah.
And it's like Dylan in the 60s. Like, at a certain point, this period's going to end. There'll be like the motorcycle accident or whatever. It'll come to an end. So like, that was sort of my pitch to it.
Right. If Werner Herzog's not going to make a movie about it, we are going into the void.
Werner Herzog would have been.
Then you're the guy. You're going to have to be. It's going to fall onto you to chronicle this.
I thought I have to do it, but I also thought it'd be fun, and I thought readers would enjoy getting the contact high from René that I do. But you know what? You've totally blown my mind now, because I actually did the audiobook myself because I thought it's my story. I should do it. Turns out I should not have put all those Danish and Spanish words in there. They're like, did I have to name every Chile ever? Because I'm sitting there like, Chile, I was like, oh, no, do it again. They made these Danish
the
words.
accent on every single one of these things.
But now I realize it should have been Werner Herzog.
That would have been genius.
Oh my God.
Whatever you would have had to pay that guy to do it.
I wake up on a beach, sand in my eyes. Oh, that would have been so good. Yeah. The midlife crisis thing, I tried to just kind of go straight at that. Obviously, that's a long-standing cliche.
Yeah.
It does happen, though. It happens to everyone. Men, women, all different ages. And the reason it begins super pretentiously with Dante's Divine Comedy.
I was just opening to that right now. It's like you give the nod to it immediately. Go ahead.
The reason is because I don't know how much you know about Dante's Divine Comedy. I did a whole class in college just about the Dante's Divine Comedy and La Vita Nuova, this other work about Beatrice from Dante. Anyway, it can be read as a political metaphor, a theological tract, just a work of poetry. It can also very easily be read as a metaphor for a midlife crisis, because the opening lines of Dante's Divine Comedy are essentially, they kind of loosely translate, in the middle of the way of my life, I found myself in a dark jungle and I didn't know the way out.
Right.
So I wasn't just being pretentious, although I'm really good at being pretentious when I need to be. But I was kind of winking at that, because then as you turn the page, I'm lying there passed out next to a sea turtle sanctuary on a beach, pretty much in the same state that Dante was when he met Virgil. Like,
literally adrift.
Yeah. Just like, where am I going? Like, I was also just exhausted from our somehow visiting like 4 cities in one day with René. That I thought, the book doesn't have an introduction on purpose. Like, I could have done the whole introduction about like, let me introduce you to René Redzepi. And I hate that. To me, that's like a Berlin Wall between you and the reader. Like, just start the damn thing. Just start the book. I've talked to a lot of people, like in food writing, for instance, people who are like, I don't know, man, I'm a little weary of Noma. I don't know if I need to read about René Redzepi anymore. And, this kind of hero worship, they read like 3 or 4 pages and they seem to get sucked in. And a lot of people are like, wait, this is a very different book than I anticipated. Because it's not supposed to be just prose, and I'm just like endlessly raising a toast to the excellence of René Redzepi. I admire the man considerably. I do think he has many heroic elements, but he's also human, and his flaws come through, I think, his temper, the difficulty of bringing Noma, Mexico together toward the end. You'll see he kind of has, a near breakdown. So I think it ended up being a little more complex than that. And I didn't want to put myself in the book originally, but my reinvention, my passages toward different modes of understanding or whatever were actually important to why I wanted to do it. He reinvented his restaurant. He reinvented himself. He reinvented the whole way Noma cooks. I suspect there's a lot of folks in like Silicon Valley who are, interested in disruption and creative destruction and those themes. They'd probably find themselves drawn to this narrative because René does that sort of thing himself with the restaurant. That's why it remains vital. But I was doing the same thing with my own life, and just trying to figure out where I was going to go.
Yeah. But you, like me, these reinventions usually are forged in the crucible of pain. Like we have something destructive happens in our lives that forces us to confront ourselves in an uncomfortable way.
Oh, that's right.
And we have no real choice but to try to find a new way forward. But then you have someone like Redzepi who's like at the peak of their powers, who's like, I'm going to cast this away. I'm going to reinvent myself now, when all the pressure and all the energy is around maintaining what's already been created. And that takes a very unique level of vision and courage to, blaze a path like that.
But it's interesting if we think about these people I brought up as potential comparisons: David Bowie, Bob Dylan, Beyonce, Steve Jobs, Muhammad Ali changed his name. I mean, we're talking about people who changed their identity, changed their practice, changed their whole creative vision all the time. And we're still talking about them. They're still vital in the culture. The people who do one thing consistently, I raise a toast to them. But oftentimes we grow bored with it, and the conversation doesn't continue. So I found that intoxicating to be around, and I thought that, his whole, he's tied to nature. The food he cooks is tied to nature, foraging, fermenting, and all that. But also his philosophy. His philosophy is essentially everything changes all the time. It's like some George Harrison shit. We are always in flux.
Well, that's nature as well.
Exactly.
Nature happens
My
in
chin
cycles.
keeps hitting the mic. But I get so pumped about this because it's exactly right. The cycles of nature are woven into the way the whole enterprise of Noma works. The last lines of the book, as readers will see, are it can change, it can change, it can change. He's talking about the new Noma that he's finally succeeded in building. But even that, he sees as being in an eternal state of metamorphosis. The menu changes and the staff changes, and they'll suddenly have a completely different vision. There are a lot of people in the book who float in and out. Danny Bowen from Mission Chinese Food.
Right, that guy's a character.
Yeah, and he's very vulnerable and honest, as people see. Enrique Olvera, Kylie Kwong, Jessica Koslow makes an appearance. Dave Chang appears toward the end. And, one note from my editor early on was, these people kind of appear, but then they vanish. And I was like, that's
what it is to be in this guy's orbit.
Exactly. And that's the truth. That's the natural truth, too, is people float in and out of our lives. It was almost, to me, a little like the Canterbury Tales. We're kind of walking down the road and we meet interesting people along the way. And sometimes they circle back and sometimes they don't. The book originally, I'll tell you something that I haven't talked about with anyone, is that the book originally had a section about my own depression that was much, much darker. It went there. Mm-hmm. And I think it was a spectacular piece of writing, actually, about how dark it got for me. And my editors, to their credit, and I respect their viewpoint on this, just felt it tonally did not fit with the rest of the book. It was suddenly it took such a dark turn that it was almost off-putting and confusing. I may use that as a separate piece on its own someday. But I think the only downside of that not being present is some people are like, I don't really understand the degree of stuckness or drift.
It punctuates the journey to have that dark moment in there. Yeah,
it's now it's a little more vague. People are like, I don't quite know what you're. I was really down. Tony Bourdain down.
Wow.
And a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I'm grappling with. This is a little bit of a shift, but my predecessor at Esquire magazine, Joshua Ozerski, incredible talent, incredible food writer, very provocative, a lot of hot takes, pissed off a lot of people. I disagreed with him furiously all the time, but he was a tremendous talent. He died. He died in Chicago in 2015, I believe, while being in Chicago for the James Beard Awards. He had some health issues, I gather, and had a seizure. Anthony Bourdain is gone.
Right.
Jonathan Gold is gone. Anthony A.A. Gill, this incredible British food writer. He's actually he's mentioned in the book. He essentially dies in the book. He was one of René's friends. Also an incredible talent, somewhat problematic writer, but from a prose standpoint, exhilarating. Different reasons behind each of the passings and different factors altogether. But as somebody who's a professional food writer, you got to be crazy if you don't think I'm thinking this through.
Yeah, and all of those people were super influential on you throughout your career.
Absolutely, especially Jonathan Gold, to be honest. When I was growing up in L.A. and I was late teens is when Ruth Reichel took over food writing and editing at the Los Angeles Times, and Jonathan Gold started writing Counterintelligence. I don't remember the precise moment, if I was still in high school or it was in college. Obviously, this pre-internet, so I'd come back from college. But I thought they were just revolutionary figures, Jonathan and Ruth. And both of them changed how I thought about Los Angeles, changed how I thought about food, changed how I thought about writing. I grew up in a very conservative environment at San Marino, and so poetry, punk rock, and food in some ways opened my consciousness.
Yeah.
But I'm, I have babies. I have 2 1-year-olds, Jasper and Wesley, and I have 2 teenagers. I want to keep ticking for a while. I want to be around. So I'm trying to learn how to do this line of work with some degree of moderation and common sense. I have trouble with a big bowl of deliciousness. I have a lot of trouble saying no. I still remember.
I think that's a common thing that
I know. But I think people drawn to food writing often have it to an acute degree. They're almost like alcoholics who become booze writers, like we're drawn right to the flame. And I remember talking to you about your dietary changes, and you used to eat a lot of junk food and stuff, right? And I remember you talking about dairy being the hardest thing to shake. That was almost like heroin or something, like getting off dairy. And hope I'm not misremembering.
Yeah, no, that's correct.
And I find that to be that haunts me. You're saying that. I think about it a lot because I also have foods that I react poorly to. I don't seem to react well to dairy. I get these being honest with you, and I don't feel as healthy. And yet I have to try everything on menus and have to do my due diligence and respect the chefs, the pastry chefs, etc. But I'm grappling with it.
Yeah, that puts you in a precarious situation, having to do all that. But I look at you as somebody who is not in the world that you're in because you have some sort of, gluttonous impulse.
No.
Like you approach food from a perspective of culture. It's interesting to hear that the seeds of your intrigue with food and cuisine were planted so early, because food, being a food and drinks writer was not the original path for you. Like you were in music and you were in movies and you did a lot of things in journalism, literature, and writing before, kind of the epiphany brought you back to food. You have an interesting story around that I'd like to have you tell. But your lens is not through taste and flavor; it's through cultural import and impact, right?
Yeah.
Like when you made that transition from writing about bands and music into food, it was because there was a cultural shift in how we perceived that world that kind of displaced music for you. Oh
yeah, absolutely. You're such a good interviewer. I'm sorry to be flattered, but that is so true. There are writers historically like A.J. Liebling or even Jim Harrison, the poet and novelist, also was a food columnist at Esquire. Jim Harrison was one of my predecessors at Esquire.
That guy's a giant.
I know. It's crazy. Yeah. I have a book of his poetry in my bag in the car here. Those guys were very much about excess. It was and then we went to the restaurant, we ordered an entire roast lamb and a roast chicken and all the foie gras. And I'm not that kind of food writer. I'm not drawn to that. I don't like the romanticization of that. I'm mostly interested in the cultural conversation and the people. And what it struck me as, there used to be a time when the musicians that you liked were emblematic of something about your belief system. They were emblems of your identity, I liked Elvis Costello and the Jam and Grandmaster Flash and the Beastie Boys, whatever. This is emblematic generationally and maybe of, where you are in the marketplace or the culture of ideas. That's still true. I have a 16-year-old daughter who's a songwriter, and bands are incredibly important to her. We go to shows all the time. But it did shift for me, and I think it shifted for a lot of people in American culture. And suddenly, it was about what David Chang is saying, and Dan Barber at Blue Hill at Stone Bars, and René Redzepi, and Dominique Crenn, and Amanda Cohen, and Mashama Bailey, and all these different figures over the last 15, 20 years became avatars of the cultural conversation in the way that Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix and Bob Dylan used to be. Or for our generation, R.E.M. and Talking Heads used to be. And food dovetails so perfectly with environmental concerns, political issues, cultural conversations about backstories and roots, family roots, your grandmother's story and everything. There's so much in food. Everyone eats, no matter what their system of eating. And so, I was aging out of being a music writer.
Right.
I would be like, I love all the new bands. I love Arcade Fire. And people would be like, they're like 15 years old. And I was like, oh, they're not a new band? Yeah. Like White Stripes, they're new, right? No, they're not. They're like a quarter century
old. I can't
old.
tell you how much I relate to that.
Yeah,
you know, it's
and
like
I do love them. But
we're like the exact same age. So for me, Elvis Costello, I mean, R.E.M. was like everything to me.
Yeah.
You know, anything that IRS was putting out.
Sure.
What's interesting is the Clash, like that whole era. And I vividly remember, this is interesting, because San Marino is such a conservative town, it seemed to kind of produce a generation of counterculture kids from our specific era.
Very perceptive.
Kurt Crochet was one of those people. Like, he comes out of San Marino High. He's a swimmer. There's a lot of traditional aspects to his upbringing, very conservative parents. And yet he was like a cipher for me for new music. Like, his sister was super punk rock. I don't know if you knew her in high school.
I do,
he introduced me to all these bands, and then it was English Beat, and and it just went on and on from there. But I learned a lot from that guy alone, coming from San Marino.
It's one of the few
and
upsides.
I'm stuck there. Like, I can listen to Reckoning, again and again and again and again and again, and I have such a difficult time connecting with anything that's relevant now.
Dude, this is an amazing conversation. Thank you. So you know the San Marino context. And I try to tell this to some people, and they don't really believe. It's hard for them to understand in New York how conservative a town like this is. We had members of Reagan's cabinet across the street.
It's like the John Birch Society.
Literally lived across the street. Okay, so it forms one of the few upsides is it forms a very strong countercultural element in the kids who just don't want any part of that, right? And so there were all sorts of people in my school, particularly when I was a freshman. Eric Varner, Teresa Marshall, Grant Minor, some folks who were gay and out in a very conservative school, which is a powerful statement at that point, particularly when I was going to like 4 Bible studies a week and stuff. People who were, Grant was a punk rocker in Penelope Spheris movies and stuff, and in a band with Flea. And, and these were like mentors to me. I mean, Eric Varner is now, I think, a professor of classics at Emory. But I knew him as this guy who like introduced me to Bowie and introduced me to Iggy Pop, and then X and Fear and all these bands. I mean, X was pivotal.
X was big.
Yeah, I mean, particularly here in Southern California, and my life was changed when a bunch of these folks took me to see the Clash at the Hollywood Palladium. I saw the Clash, I think, on the Sandinista tour. Maybe I was 14.
English Beat open.
How do you know that?
Because I know my shit with this stuff, dude.
The English Beat open.
Yeah. How insane is that?
It was the most like iridescent moment of my life. I was completely levitated. I had never felt anything like this. It was like, oh no, this is church. This is church. I was lifted off the ground. Because the crowd had packed in so high that but like when I left, my shirt was so sweaty that I remember actually wringing it like a dish towel, and the beat was out of control. Ranking Rogers recently passed away, which is crushing.
I saw that. Yeah.
But like the Clash, you're a 14-year-old kid, you're susceptible to this, but they had like the Union Jack roll down, and they started playing Toccata and Fugue by Bach, like the organ thing. It's like the Dracula music. And then they come out and just burst into London Calling, as I remember it. It may have been something else. I'm so bored with the USA or something. But I saw the light. I was sitting there like, oh my God. I don't know what they were talking about politically. I never quite unraveled that. I mean, I gather they were from the left, but it wasn't that. It was the sense of liberation. It was a sense of thinking for yourself. That was so much about punk, so much what punk rock was about, right? But exactly as you're saying, like that was because I bonded with kids on campus who were the thinkers and the progressives and the people challenging the status quo, and they're still to this day my friends. I mean, I saw Grant Minor last summer in Laguna Beach, and we hung out a little bit.
Wow!
And I don't think I would have been a writer had that not happened. I mean, also going up to Vroman's bookstore in Pasadena and randomly buying Howl by Allen Ginsberg and Frank O'Hara poems and Lawrence Ferlinghetti, all the beat stuff. Obviously, when you're a kid, that's really mesmerizing.
Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test.
Totally. It's Tom Wolfe was a big influence on my life, and I think part of what I wanted to do with Hungry actually is write a book that won't be assigned in school. Mm-hmm. Like when you'd go into a used bookstore and you'd find an old Tom Wolfe paperback. The Right Stuff or Radical Chic or something. And it just seemed fun to read.
Yeah.
And you're like, they're not teaching, they're signing the Scarlet Letter and all that. I want a book that I hope like people in their teens and 20s just pick up for fun.
Right.
You know, and they could read it in a day. And it's
you can. It's only like 200 pages.
Yeah, it's supposed to have that energy. There's an electric Kool-Aid acid test quote in the book about the whole Ken Kesey gang and the bus, because we were about to go.
You're kind of on this bus.
I was on a similar bus going through Mexico with the, consciousness expanding crew of Noma. So I thought, let's make the reference explicit, because I'm not aping Tom Wolfe there, but he was a clear influence.
Right.
And I think it's, but I just thought please let this not be boring. I just hate boring books.
It's definitely not. It moves quickly. I'm not done with it yet. Maybe it gets boring, but I don't think so.
No, it doesn't get boring. It gets better.
And there is there's a lyrical poetry in your writing. I mean, I know that you studied poetry, and that's a big interest of you. You're an avid consumer of poetry. But there's a lyricism to the prose, but it's always very accessible. Like, you have a very kind of pure, clean way of writing. You don't get caught up in your own ego about how to turn a catchy phrase.
I hope not. I hope that's a little bit of a byproduct of experience. You know? I think that I remember... That's
the journalist.
Yeah, I remember reading somebody like Wallace Stegner years ago saying that when you're starting out, you're sort of like a walking thesaurus. You want to show off your words. Like, got big words. Look at me, And I remember thinking, yeah, you just can't do that, man. Like, like I could deliver the fireworks. Watch, the arrogance of youth. But a lot of writers, seem to talk about the beauty of simplicity, clarity, and minimalism as they get older. I'm 52. I get it now. I really see why there's delight in that, and why
it's harder. It's harder to do.
They're both hard, but there's something very satisfying about direct, clear sentences, and also when you factor in reality that most people are just inundated with distractions. They don't have a lot of time to read. You're really grabbing people by the neck and saying, "Please read this." That's the truth. So it has to be captivating for them. Otherwise, you're giving them homework. That's the thing. I don't want it to be homework. So
that's come up I've had a couple authors in here recently, and they've all kind of echo the same sentiment. Like, when you're asking somebody to read your book, like now today in this culture, in the age of distraction, it's a big ask. You're saying, I need you to set aside whatever it is that you're doing, and in an undistracted way, sit down with these pages that I've written. And, you better deliver the goods if you're going to make that request on someone.
Yeah. Yeah. They better have some sort of takeaway too,
So when you're a kid and you're seeing The Clash and English Beat and
R.E.M, the
all
Dream
of that.
Syndicate, the 3 o'clock.
How good was R.E.M?
The whole Paisley Underground scene was happening, so I was really into that stuff. Like, particularly the 3 o'clock. I saw a bunch of times. X. It was just like, it's dirty, it's raw, it's alive in a way that seemed like an antidote to what was antiseptic about San Marino culture or whatever. I mean, I could paint that town with a broad brush and be just critical, but of course that's not fair. I mean, I have a lot of friends from San Marino. I have friends, on the conservative side of the aisle who are still friends, and we just disagree. Yeah. We disagree pretty aggressively on Facebook and whatever. But we've dropped a few, a few didn't make the cut after a while. But some, I could meet them for breakfast and we laugh. We have a good time, and it's.
So did you have a sense that you wanted to be a writer at that age?
Yeah.
You did.
Which is ridiculous. I don't know why. I think some people are drawn to writing because they have a pulsing, gnawing need to tell a specific story.
Right.
Could be a story of pain from their youth, of abuse. It could be an immigrant story that involves a lot of challenges and uphill battles. I mean, speaking candidly, I'm not coming from that place. I was drawn to books because I loved language. I just loved stories. I loved sentences. I found them exhilarating. Like the Lawrence Ferlinghetti book or a Frank O'Hara book. I liked that the words were jumping all over the page. I liked that they were breaking the rules of punctuation and grammar. That seemed fun. That seemed kind of punk rock, like, you know. And I started to see, you know, Joan Didion, Tom Wolfe, Gay Talese, John McPhee, who was a teacher of mine in college. They would do these incredible pieces for magazines, sometimes profiles of stars, but sometimes more reported essays about cultural movements or whatever. I thought, wow, that's one hell of a job. I mean, it's basically subsidized adventure. Mm-hmm. Like, you get to weigh in on the culture, you get to move the needle, you get to meet all these captivating people, and somebody else pays you. Let's do that.
There was a golden era where magazines really, you know, led the way in terms of those kinds of think pieces from, you know, like Joan Didion, Gore Vidal, and
Norman Mailer.
Norman
Nora
Mailer.
Ephron, James Baldwin wrote for Esquire.
And Esquire, Esquire was really the tip of the spear when it came to that. I mean, Vanity Fair was like that for a while. And for whatever reason, Esquire has sort of survived the collapse of the magazine industry. I mean, you know, I can't imagine how difficult it is to remain relevant in this culture as a magazine. Like, it's a dying thing. And yet Esquire seemed to have figured out a way to survive and still maintain some foothold in that, you know, in an era in which that's being disintegrated.
We hope.
Yeah.
Knock on wood. You know, it's
funny. Is it the same? Is there a sense of like we're responsible for shepherding this legacy?
There's definitely a sense of responsibility regarding the heritage of the magazine and all the incredible bylines that have been in it, and, you know, dispatches from Vietnam and Nora Ephron's original column, everything from, you know, very dark, disturbing, investigative pieces to some of the best light, entertaining reading ever. And budgets are tight. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah,
you know,
like I have money.
I have to really make my case anytime I'm visiting a city for Esquire Best New Restaurants research or something. We find ways to make it work. Speaking candidly, when I went to New Orleans, Pablo Johnson, a friend of mine, I slept on his couch. When I went to San Francisco, Omar Mamoun lent me his apartment. I mean,
if it was 1978.
They would have put me up at the Ritz. You know, like I would have been up on Nob Hill, you know, at the Fairmount or whatever, or the top of the Mark. You know, like I mean, in fact, I even experienced that in the 90s. It was pretty profligate. I stayed at the best hotels in the world. They would just send me to them. So, hey, you don't need that. To me, what's important is the work. You know, and I you know, I'll tell you this is interesting. Like, I should have brought one, but the recent issue that's out, the summer issue, has Brad Pitt, Leo DiCaprio, and Quentin Tarantino on the cover. Has our best bars issue. It has just one page after another, no filler, really good stuff. And I'll give this issue to people, and they'll say, my God, this is a blast to spend time with. Like, I really enjoy it. I'm like, yes, it's called a magazine. Yeah. Here's how you operate it. You turn to the table of contents, and that tells you where my Barada rant is in there.
And it has a kind of throwback aesthetic to it. Like,
it does now.
There's a vintage kind of architecture to the design.
Yeah, which looks beautiful. I don't know how that plays in the marketplace. I think they're still trying to figure that out. You know, there's a way in which you can be almost too backwards looking, but we'll see if that works out. I mean, the
idea that I get out of it is we may not have the budgets to put you up at Top of the Mark or the Ritz, but if you want to write long form and you want to appreciate, if you appreciate and love reading long form, like, we're the place for that.
Yeah, and the New Yorker. I mean, I'm not in it for the luxury. I'm really not. I'm in it to do this work as long as they'll let me, until they kick me off the bus. I really am. I'm just running out the clock. Okay, I'm 52. I figure, like, I'm gonna do this as far as I can because it brings me joy, and I stay young, to be honest. I mean, I'm always learning. The coolest thing about it is I'm always learning. I'm always meeting people. I go to new restaurants. I meet the chefs. I meet cultural figures, and I learn from them. I go to a new city all the time. You know, there's that Talking Heads song, Cities. Find me a new city to live in. Like, I find that it's so exciting to just drop into Seoul, Korea, or Buenos Aires, or Modena, Italy, or Memphis, or Phoenix, or Chicago. Maybe a city I haven't spent any time in. Minneapolis, I've never been there before last year. The Replacements, Prince, you know, Bob Dylan from Minnesota. Like, and to absorb the energy of that city and learn what makes it tick, learn some history. Like, I'll give you an example. I went to Minneapolis and my wife was like, you should reach out to Andrew Zimmern, the Bizarre Foods guy from TV. And I was like, really? I mean, he's like a celebrity. Why would he want to hang with me? But he was so nice. He emailed back like, yeah, let's get dinner. So I sat down for dinner in Minneapolis. He lives there. He lives in Minneapolis. He sat down with, as I think Dan Buettner does.
Dan Buettner does. Didn't you? You went to his place there, didn't you? Did you
no,
visit
I hung
him
out
there?
with him in New York.
Oh, you did?
He's awesome. I mean, the Blue Zones books are pivotal.
Dan's the greatest.
Yeah, he's a good guy. But Zimmern was like, oh, do you know all about this element of Minneapolis history and this element? And, he was like a storehouse of information. That's the luxury. That's actually luxury. It's not some fancy hotel. It's somebody teaching you something. I'm sort of like a perpetual student. Mm-hmm. That's why it was exciting to meet you and come here, to learn about your life. It's just, I find other people's lives instantly fascinating. And when you were asking about being a writer, I mean, when I started, I went to college and I wrote some poems, but I started writing short stories. And I even won some fiction prize, whatever. But
and you got to study with Russell Banks.
Russell Banks, Joyce Carol Oates, yeah. But the my fiction was fine, but I think the tank was already running empty. I didn't have a lot to say. My life had been pretty copacetic, pretty mellow, actually. And when I took a class with John McPhee from The New Yorker, it turned my head around because he's a nonfiction master. And he opened my eyes to the simplicity of, you write about other people. You're good at listening to people. You're good at hearing their stories and asking them questions in a very, I think, unannoying, unobtrusive way. And if you have an appetite for that, the sky's the limit because there's always new people to meet and talk about. So that's really what set me on the path. I mean, I was so into music and it was like, wait, I can meet them and write about them? I met David Bowie twice. I interviewed him. Willie Nelson, I went on the bus with him, and yes, we did smoke. Van Morrison, who was odious.
I heard you tell a story about that.
Did I tell you that?
It just sounded horrible.
He was a nightmare. Green Day, Janet Jackson, all sorts of people. It was, I don't do selfies with them. I'm not like, whoa, cool, I'm hanging with Willie Nelson. It's not like that.
You must have pinch me moments. I can't believe I'm having this almost famous, sort of experience.
Yeah.
Getting to live vicariously, through the lives of these people that you get to pop in and out of, at will almost.
Yeah, pinch me is a good description for it because people have asked me, don't you have any, actually my publishing house, you must have selfies with René. And I was like, no, in 5 years, I've never done a selfie with René. Right. I'm not like that, But Willie Nelson, for instance, partly the bus was absolutely befogged with pot smoke. So my mind was working in a weird way, but I was like, whoa, that face is Willie Nelson's face. And it's looking at me and it's talking in that distinctive Willie Nelson voice. Is this real? What is happening? It's a little like Quantum Leap, that show where the guy would just be suddenly beamed into the French Revolution or beamed into the Boston Tea Party or something. I would sit there how did I get here?
How did I get here? Back to a David Byrne.
Yeah, is this occurring or am I dreaming? It has happened many times. It happened with Tom Cruise at the Japanese restaurant.
Whenever that guy looks like Tom Cruise.
Yeah, he looks remarkably similar to Tom Cruise.
But you must have had experiences, they say never meet your heroes, where it's disappointing. I guess the Van Morrison thing is probably
that was disappointing. But David Bowie was we can be heroes just for one day. He really both times, absolute gentleman. Really, and it's interesting. Both times he was early. As you might have noticed, I'm often early. I couldn't believe it. I walk into the room, studio or something where I was going to interview Bowie the second time, and he was already there. He's like, "Hey, Jeff, how are you?" And I'm like, "Oh my God." That was a joint interview with Moby because they were doing some collaborations or something, and they were for the cover of Entertainment Weekly. I'm proud to say
I remember that.
Well, you do. I'm proud to say we got Bowie on the cover because I felt he deserved it, and we were always going for the younger audience, but. He's like, well, we really shouldn't start the interview until Moby shows up, but why don't you and I just talk? I'm like, just talk to David Bowie?
To me?
Just okay. Well, tell me about Fripp's guitar sound on Heroes. I'm going to fanboy like mad, dude. You don't want this. You don't want me to just talk to you because I'll lose my shit. I'm obsessed. We have David Bowie portrait in our house. We actually bought one in Copenhagen, Lauren and I. I mean, we are a Bowie household.
A shrine.
A little bit.
Bowie.
We have Bowie fridge magnets, we're into the guy. But yeah, there were some people, a lot of times it was the younger crowd coming up. Like I remember Green Day being a little aggro with the interview, and I think I really like them and admire them now. And they were
you're Entertainment Weekly, like we're too edgy for that.
Yeah, man, you're perceptive. I think that's what Green it was. Day. A little bit of friction, and
before it became a Broadway show.
Yeah. Someday soon, Billy Joe, I have something to tell you. You're going to be on Broadway, so don't give me any attitude. No, I mean, I like them quite a bit, actually, but they were really young and they were breaking through, and there's so much stress when Dookie was becoming this huge. And at a certain point, Billy Joe was kind of lecturing me about the Ramones. And I was like, yeah, so I'm going to turn off the tape recorder for a second. Let me just tell you a little bit about myself, because I was like, I know, I look very square, but I was into the Ramones when you were a baby. Don't.
Right.
It was fine. But it's an interesting story? My daughter is into a band called Swimmers, SWMRS. We have seen them 3 times. They are rad. They're a punk rock band from Oakland. The first time we saw them, Providence, Rhode Island, all ages show. Margo was probably 13. I drove her up to Providence just to see his band. There's probably 20 people in the audience. The guys from the band came down from the stage, just meet everybody. It was like so low key. Now they're becoming big stars. The drummer of Swimmers is Billy Joe Armstrong's son.
Wow.
That's how old we are.
Yeah, now I'm really feeling old.
Green Day's kids have bands.
After this is over, we're going to have to go listen to some Pavement or something just to reset our equilibrium.
I saw your girlfriend. So they are now the next generation, the children of Green Day. Like I was like, wow, okay. Wow. We got to face facts now. But this is a weird twist. Max Becker, one of the guys in Swimmers, started posting on his Instagram story little frame grabs of my pieces from Esquire, because it turns out that the guys in Swimmers are obsessed with food. And then he was like, this column is so cool and I want to make this recipe. And I was like, this is amazing. So I DM'd him. I was like, hey, that's so nice. And he's like, I'm a big fan of your writing. I couldn't believe this.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, well, you're not going to believe this, dude, but I have seen Swimmers 3 times. Because he was like, I'm in a band called Swimmers. I was like, yeah, I know. I've seen you. Yeah. And he was so shocked. He was like, you've seen Swimmers? I was like, yeah, my daughter's like, you're like actually your first fan. And we have seen you 3 times. And now I text with Max all the time. Like he's looking for a restaurant to eat at and stuff like that. So I was thinking about bringing him to Noma.
That would be a cool story.
Yeah.
I think it really just validates this full circle thing that we were talking about originally, this intersection, in terms of cultural significance between music and food.
It's interesting to me that the guys in the bands are more interested in chefs now. It's fascinating to me.
It's a strange thing.
It's strange. Like the guy, Franz Ferdinand, like one of those guys had a food blog for a while. I was in...
There's do you know Grizzly Bear?
Oh, yeah.
So Chris from Grizzly Bear, who's a friend of ours, has a cookbook.
That's right. Right. Yeah.
Super into food.
It's all one now.
What's up, Chris? Listen to the podcast.
What's up, Chris? So I was in Copenhagen eating with René Redzepi and his family at Sanchez, which is Rocio Sanchez's Mexican restaurant. Some of the best Mexican food in the world is in Copenhagen because of Rocio. And René and his family often get Sunday brunch there. And I was visiting to visit the new Noma with Toby, my 13-year-old, then 12. But some guy from a band, I think it was that band St. Paul and the Broken Bones, or so like one of these kind of neo-soul bands coming up, he came over to the table just like, oh my God, are you René Redzepi? I can't believe it.
Wow.
He's like, we're touring, we're playing tonight. You want tickets? Like he was so freaked out that he was seeing René, you know? And I was like, that is fascinating.
So what do you make of that?
I think it's indicative of where the cultural energy went. You know, there's a lot of great music coming out. I mean, I'm a weirdo. I still buy CDs. I'm obsessed with Aldous Harding, she's the singer from New Zealand. I will just play her CD on sort of a loop for days. And I know through my daughter and I know through my own willful experiments in finding newness that there's still great stuff being made. But I think it's difficult after so many decades of pop music in its form, in its recorded form. It's difficult not to say, yeah, this is cool. It's just like Pavement.
Yeah.
You know, like, which was just like the Velvet Underground, or like, this is a lot like the Pixies, or yeah, this is cool. It reminds me quite a bit of Erykah Badu, or, you know, like you're after absorbing decades of musical information, it's hard sometimes to confront originality, to locate originality. Yeah. And I think with food, even though there are centuries of tradition and culture informing it, sometimes things seem radically new. And they bring you that sort of receptivity and excitement that you used to feel with music. I mean, that's what happened to me the first time I ate at Noma, was I was adrift and sad, depressed. And I was kind of at the point where I'd drive around, play Rolling Stone, play Exile on Main Street. That always used to work. Loving Cup always used to work. I mean, if you talk about self-medication, Loving Cup always did the trick, and it wouldn't. I didn't get nothing out of it. It just didn't lift me. It didn't rouse me. It didn't transform me, and I was getting worried. I was like, I'm so down that music does nothing for me. You know, Cat Power, the greatest. That album is so important to me, and it just made me disengage. I was like, I don't know what's happening. And for some reason, when I went to Noma, it was like, oh my God, this is like seeing The Clash when I was 14. Yeah. Like I'm completely alive to this. I met a guy recently who you should have on the show. You probably get it all the time. It's really annoying. Diego Zambrano. He's from Work and Company. He's one of the most influential designers in the world, and he's from Brazil originally, but he now lives in Brooklyn. I met this guy at a dinner, and I didn't know who he was, and so I was just talking to him he's a cool guy. He told me that this is very much in line with what you explore on the cast, but he went to Noma, Mexico. He's not a food guy or anything. He's a designer. He's from that. I think they designed the Apple stores, so that's pretty big.
Yeah,
that's what he said.
That's a good gig.
So that's a good one. But he went to Noma, Mexico, and it changed his life in every way. It changed his approach to creativity. It changed his approach to eating. He's lost like 60 pounds. He changed his whole diet. He has now been to Noma 7 times in Copenhagen. He has almost like a standing table there. And he was like, he didn't know me. I said, well, you're going to like my book. You know, like,
yeah.
He's like, what's your book? And I said, well, my book's called Hungry. It's all about René Redzepi. And he's like, oh, I pre-ordered that. But he feels that René Redzepi is one of the great artists alive.
Yeah.
So to answer long-windedly your question, that's the thing, is that we're confronting people like Massimo Bottura and Dominique Crenn and René Redzepi, Virgilio Martinez in Peru, who are artists. That's a controversial thing. Some people will say that's bogus, they're just cooking. Okay. You go to Noma and you tell me that's not art.
I love that. I mean, that's it, man. The idea that this person who is fully expressed in their creativity can go to have an experience at a restaurant that is so impactful that it changes how they see the world. It sounds like an extravagant lie.
I don't think
how could that possibly be the case?
He showed me pictures. He started working out and stuff. He showed me pictures. He was obese. I mean, he was quite fat. He'd like lost.
Wow.
I was like, we have to do a panel together, because the fact that Noma changed your life in this way, that like this transformative lightning rod moment, is kind of what I'm talking about too. And it's hard to convey. The difficulty, like a challenge with this book, for instance, is like if I was talking about a record or a band that changed my life, you can go listen to them. talking about a film, you can go watch the film.
Right.
And not everyone can just hop on a plane and go to Noma. So.
Yeah, and this is the thing. Like let's just check our white male privilege at the door right now. We're talking about a restaurant that is in Copenhagen that's impossible to get into, and even when you can, is going to cost you a fortune.
Yeah, it's expensive.
Right? And so, let's just kind of walk through that, elitist landmine for a minute, because I think
that's always fun.
when you well, I think what I'm getting at is
I have to use the restroom. You can walk through the elitist landmine instead.
No, well, let's take a bathroom break.
No, I don't actually. I'm just joking.
We can. Because the reason that my intention behind this is that when you fully understand who Redzepi is, you have a very different you have a very different concept, a different lens on this whole thing than what I originally projected onto it, which was like, oh, this some fancy chef, and it's like, this is inaccessible. How can I make this conversation around fancy food relatable to the average person?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that's probably my main obstacle to get over here, because I don't actually think you have to be that interested in food or high-end tasting menu dining to like this book. But to get you to pick it up, I have to persuade you of that. And it's important to know that René's own story is an immigrant story. His father was a Muslim ethnically Albanian guy who was in Macedonia as part of the Albanian diaspora. So he came to Copenhagen at a certain point in his life, for a better life, and met a Danish woman, got married, had René and Kenneth, who's his twin brother. And René grew up having the Quran read to him as his bedside reading, and he grew up encountering a lot of bigotry and being seen as an outsider, dealing with basically a lot of flat-out racism toward his family and toward himself. He has, a name that's quite unusual in Denmark. And a lot of people don't know this about René. They assume these are just these fancy pants Vikings, and if you go to the Noma kitchen, which I'd love you to do someday, it's a fascinating experience, because you go in there and it's like, it's a small world at Disney. I mean, there's people from all over the world. There's people from every continent, men and women of all different backgrounds. It's really not a Scandinavian restaurant at all. It's actually a global kitchen, and all those perspectives are brought to bear on the cooking. So he's seen as the godfather of the new Nordic movement, but as I say in the book, it's really more about new as opposed to Nordic. Mm-hmm. He was sort of like, what if we hit reset? What if we just tabula rasa the whole thing? We get rid of traditional Danish cooking and think about what the landscape produces. What does it generate? Herbs, vegetables, seafood, etc. What can we create that's a kind of a new manifestation of the spirit of this region? So he's also, it's a highly democratic enterprise. Like, I know this sounds crazy when it's very expensive, but there are tables set aside for students that are offered at a discount all the time. Like, that's a regular, I think every single night, there are students who can get a much cheaper rate and eat there. And it's not the white tablecloth, prime rib cart, candelabras, like foie gras. It's not that at all. It feels very different than that. It's not like a restaurant. Here's how I was saying to somebody, and I think it's a generational shift. There are some of the older chefs, very talented individuals, whom I do believe at the heart of it were cooking for rich people. I mean, that's what the restaurant was about. It's basically an enterprise to provide luxury to wealthy patrons. Okay, rich people do indeed eat at Noma, as they eat at Blanca in Brooklyn and Momofuku Co., David Chang's place. But those enterprises were not built for rich people. They were built, I really believe this, with a more democratic spirit, and they're meant to be accessible to anyone. You don't have to get dressed up. There's not all that kind of off-putting formality and haughtiness. I get in some trouble sometimes because I say this to people, and for a kid who grew up in San Marino, in a way, I have no right to say it. I concede that. I grew up, pretty cozy. But I don't care how much a meal costs. It actually doesn't matter to me at all. What matters to me is if it's worth it. And if it's worth it, it's just like tickets to Hamilton. You know, I know people who spent $800 on tickets to Hamilton and they couldn't afford it. I couldn't afford it either. And then they went and it changed their life. It was transformative. They're like, it's one of the great memories of my life. I believe that's true about Noma. I think that's why I went into credit card debt and started spending money.
You underwrote all these adventures going to Norway.
The last third of the book is paid for by the book advance. Essentially, all the trips to Merida and Oaxaca and Norway and stuff. But like a lot of the early trips, Sydney, essentially, Lauren and I just paid for that on our own. We bought our own flights, stayed at the old Claire Hotel, spent too much. But when you get the rush, the contact high of that clarity, that sense of mission of eating at Noma or other restaurants I can name that are like that, you realize it's worth it. Okay. It's not, by the way, it's not like $1,000 a person. I don't actually know what the current price is. I have to figure out because I'm going soon. But it's, I think like, are vacations worth it? Like the Rolling Stones are touring.
Well, what it is the difference between somebody who values experience over material accumulation, like where you prioritize what to do with whatever disposable income you have. Some people have a lot of that. Some people have a little of that, or not much of much of it at all. But are you thinking about upgrading your car, or are you thinking about like some experience that you're going to go on or take your family on, or something that will enrich you in a different way that's ephemeral?
Bingo. So to me, experience is what's worth the money if it delivers.
Yeah. You wouldn't be a journeyman journalist if that wasn't your priority.
That's what gets me high. I don't even buy new clothes. As my wife would tell you, I don't even wash my clothes. So I apologize if I'm stinking up the studio. But I don't care about those luxury things in any way. I care about new vantage points on life and that sense of rush in your head that's like, I'm really alive right now. That can come through a poem for me. It can come through a song. It can come through time with my children. It's true for so many of us. It can come on a long walk. I love a good walk, and those things are free. I just happen to, or cheap to buy a book of poetry or whatever, but I feel that Noma is worth it. And I know this, I sound like an advertisement for him, and that's not what I wanted to. Pete Wells is a good friend of mine at the New York Times. He's their critic. He makes fun of me because he said that I sound like Dennis Hopper in Apocalypse Now, because Dennis Hopper lives upriver where Marlon Brando's character lives, and he's like, you got to meet the man. He's a god. You don't understand, man. He's a god. You got to taste the food.
You've drunk the Kool-Aid.
You got to go to Noma. You won't
Redzepi.
believe it. Yeah. And there's some truth to that. I get a little overamped, shall we say? But I wouldn't say if I didn't believe it. But
what do you extract from the experience that is something that someone who's listening to this, who might never have the opportunity to go to Noma, can kind of, take home and incorporate into their own life? Like, what about, his philosophy on food or life that you find so infectious and so, effervescent and invigorating? What can we bottle and repurpose for ourselves?
If life is not working out for you, change it. That's not a brand new statement. We hear that from Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, and we hear that from spiritual figures. But there's truth to it. It may be your relationship. It may be your line of work. It may be your health, as you know. Change it. Do that. Do the work. Say yes to that. That was really what René shook me up.
Yeah, the book is about saying yes. It is about that courage of challenging whatever status quo or rut that you find yourself in.
Totally. Get out of the rut. Do the work to say yes to that. And also, can I say something that's very interesting? I talk about in the book that when I first got a seat at Noma, I got a table for two. And I had all these friends, when they knew that I'd met René and wrote about him in Mexico, they were like, okay, listen to me, dude. Seriously, I will move fucking mountains. You ever get a table at Noma? Text me. I will buy a ticket immediately. It's like, you sure? Like, yes. All of those people, some of whom have unlimited resources, which I do not. Some people with a lot of money. That was like, I got a table at Noma. Join me. No,
Can't do it.
I gotta rake the leaves, man. I'm supposed to get a haircut. I'm not kidding. People said shit like this. I was like, listen, you told me you'd move mountains. I mean, it was really interesting to me how many people, for absolutely sensible reasons, do not say yes to the greatest experiences in life. So and I just think that I could not afford this. It was, I mean, it looks like I really couldn't do it, but I found that I needed to. I needed to say yes to it. And I realize it's an extraordinary set of circumstances that I happen to meet René and everything. But I do think that these opportunities come about all the time. And it could be group of old friends from college, group of swimmers from the team. We want to finally get together, you know. I mean, this is true of me. Friends of mine are dying. I mean, I'm, you know, starting to lose people in my life, or they're getting sick. It's like, let's get together. Let's go for a hike. Let's have a weekend together. Say yes to that. You know, I'm not trying to make some snotty argument like everyone should eat in Denmark. I mean, it's about like, you are here now. Make the most of it and change what's not working. You know that from your own life. You know, you had to make that change. And I think it's crucial. Like, I'm a much happier person now. Yeah.
I think that's a powerful lesson, you know, for everybody, and it's something I'm trying to do better at. Like, I had that very example has come up. Like, old swimmer friend of mine called me up. Hey, I want to get everyone back together. I want to go on a little trip. Yeah. And I immediately go to all the reasons why I can't do it. And I'm like, this is never going to happen again. I have to find a way to say yes to this. And that's maybe on the more extreme examples, but I think all of us every day, not every day, but periodically throughout our lives are visited with tiny little opportunities to say yes to that we just don't, because it's so easy to just default to, you know, whatever has to get done the next week.
I mean, I started this week in Santa Barbara. I landed in Burbank. I'm a big proponent of the Burbank and Long Beach airports.
Burbank Airport is where it's at, man.
That's Californians know.
It's
that.
Like living 1950, you know? You pull right up to the door.
It's rad. Like Long Beach even better, man. It's like, so, but I drove straight up to Santa Barbara. One of my closest friends took his own life there a few weeks ago.
I saw your Instagram post.
Yeah, and I didn't make it to the memorial service for the same reasons we're talking about. But I mean, I had absolutely bona fide excuses. 4 children, all in my care, deadlines. I mean, it just couldn't happen, unfortunately. But I knew I wanted to go back at least privately and pay my respects. True story, weird thing. Soon as I was going into Santa Barbara, Elton John's Funeral for a Friend was playing on the radio. Isn't that weird?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's weird.
But I just found that even taking this time in a context that is otherwise useless, it certainly can't be monetized. There's no payoff, but just going to Santa Barbara, standing on the beach, thinking of Russ. I'm a dork, so I read a few poems out loud. I just sort of sent up thoughts to him. It was worth it. You know, it was worth saying yes to that. If you went on Instagram, it looked like I was just getting a burger and a martini, which I did do as well. But, you know, I really, actually a guy from the Santa Barbara Independent, terrific alternative weekly up there, wanted to write about the book. So I said to him, you know, I'll come on up. He's like, wait, you're coming to Santa Barbara? It's like, yeah. But really it was to pay tribute to Russ. So, but you know, that moment happened. He had a lot of demons. He was struggling with mental illness and
the surfer, filmmaker.
Yeah, I mean, an extraordinary filmmaker. And he's a great writer. Surfed almost every morning. He seemed to, like, you know, one of these people that on the surface seemed to have the perfect life, you know. And he made a beautiful film about a local barbershop. He made a beautiful film about, at one point,
there's a piano, right?
Yeah, yeah, man, you do your work. It's like they put pianos out on State Street just so people could play them at random. And he made this very tone poem-like film just capturing people playing the pianos in the middle of the night. Some of them drunk, some of them in love, some of them old people, some of them super, you know, little kids. It was just the most beautiful thing. He had so much spirit. But he had a lot of, you know, you would get these crazy calls. It was like the movie Beautiful Mind. You know, it was like he would see things and hear voices and think that the government was after him and stuff. And those of us who were close to him, you didn't know how to fix that. I mean, you didn't. It's very difficult to.
It's like people like that whose light shines bright, but it's not meant long for the world.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, if you have friends, I saw a friend just recently who's really struggling with depression and stuff. Take the time, meet, talk, maybe read this, call me anytime. There's things you can say. With other kinds of mental illness, it's very difficult. It's so distressing and so confusing that at times Russ seemed very stable and normal. In fact, the last time I saw him in person, he said, "Man, everything's good. I'm in a good place," But then it would come back. I don't know why. I'm sorry, I'm babbling down this track, but it's as I get older, I'm realizing that some of these people I love, they're not going to be with us forever, obviously, and I need to start saying yes to these moments, even when it means putting work aside and spending money that I don't have, and that's the essence of life, And
you, as a writer, it's imperative that you live your life and embrace the world. Otherwise, you don't have a tableau to write from. Experience is the juice from
very much is,
which everything else springs. And part of this conversation has sort of been like a walk down Gen X memory lane.
Yeah.
And you wrote a book about Gen X.
I did.
That came out like 10 years ago.
11
right?
years ago, yeah.
So I'm interested in like your thoughts on like how do you feel about Gen X now versus how you felt about when you wrote that book?
The New York Times did this big Gen X package recently, and Alex Williams, who wrote one of the pieces of it, kindly approached
Gen
me.
X will save us. Was it that?
Something
I read
like
something.
It was some big package, and he said, "Do you want to talk? Can I interview you?" And I did the dumbest thing that an author can do. I declined. I'm telling
you didn't say yes.
I didn't say yes. I was like, I've really left that Gen X thing behind. I felt very liberated by no in this particular case. I said, I really appreciate you approaching me. And he did actually mention the book in the piece. But I was like, I don't want to get down that lane anymore. I don't know. All that demographic stuff just seemed kind of meaningless after a while. There's a point at which you keep talking about a book so much that it almost dislodges from reality, and you're not even sure. Like this, I've been very honest, and this is a nice way of talking. But sometimes I feel like I just go into autopilot. And some of the Gen X points, I have nothing left to say. I don't mean that in some snobby way. I just didn't even want to contribute to it. And I will tell you this: if you ever have a temptation to write some sort of Gen X manifesto, don't. It totally bombed. It totally bombed.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Like, I mean, Nick Hornby liked it. A couple of people who wrote about it in The Believer. There were some. I mean,
that's
reviews.
cool. You'll always have that.
Seriously, that's my takeaway. It's like Nick Hornby. Doug Rushkoff, I got to be friends with some really great authors and thinkers who did like the book somehow. The book was written really quickly, like 4 months, and people say it's not really thought through. It's kind of ramshackle, and I was like, you are absolutely correct. Anything written that quickly, but baby boomers, they love to read about boomers. If Tom Brokaw is doing another special about baby boomers on TV, guess what? My in-laws are going to watch the Boomers Show. Millennials, they just want to talk about being a millennial all the time. Gen Xers rather read a book about some obscure snail in Tasmania or something. Like it's like we are so ornery and contrarian. And again, that's a crazy generalization, of course. But I have sensed it so often. People our age, I just sense it. Like conversation goes into the most obscure bands and films and cultural moments that we share, that are cherished in part because of their distance from the mainstream. That's exactly what we love about it. So the last thing Gen Xers want to do is read a book about Generation X. They actually they don't have any interest. I tried, believe me. So
let's keep our secret little fetishes in the dark.
Yeah, our little group, as Kurt Cobain said. Like, every now and then somebody would be like, I liked your book. I like the Mission of Burma reference. And I'll be like, awesome. You got the Mission of Burma reference? Okay. This is a good day. Like my work is done.
Speaking of references, like you did Brian Koppelman's podcast recently,
I did,
right?
yeah.
And I'm sure, do you watch Billions?
Yeah, we're big.
So
I'm obsessed with Taylor and I'm obsessed with Wags.
It's so good, right?
Yeah, those characters to me, I mean, the writing of the characters is so
it's
impressive.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And Brian, also being our age, is like the king of dropping obscure Gen X references throughout that show. Like the more obscure, the better.
Yeah.
And I don't get all of them, but
sure
every once in a while I'm like, oh yeah.
Well, and he has, the reason I got to know Brian is because I wrote a thing for Esquire's website about how Billions was essentially the best food show on TV. And
huge foodie. Restaurants are a character in the show.
Yeah, he is very intelligent about the place that these restaurants occupy in the consciousness of New York.
Right.
So they are chosen very smartly. Like suddenly Dave Chang appears or suddenly Wiley Dufresne appears in the Ortolan scene and you think, bingo, that was so well done. Like he knows.
It's character specific and consistent. Yeah.
Exactly. Koppelman knows that the cultural conversation has shifted. He knows where Wags would eat, and he knows where Chuck would eat, for instance. Like and
those are very different places.
They're very different places, and like the maybe one of the best food scenes of all time is when Wags wigs out at Sushi Nakazawa because of the like douche bro at the end of the counter who's talking on his phone and dunking everything in tons of soy sauce. Like that was just that was a sublime piece of writing.
It's weird and amazing how a restaurant can evoke not just a specific memory, but like a setting and a time and a place. Like if you say to me, Cafe Odeon or Balthazar or Nell's, like these are all iconic, New York establishments.
All
for
Keith
me,
McNally places.
Yeah, exactly, right? They all conjure up something very specific in my mind as somebody who lived there during, various periods of time when those things were important.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I just wrote a piece for the issue previous to this one about Pastis coming back. Pastis was one of the Keith McNally successes. It was really the follow up to Balthazar and the Meatpacking District, which at that time was still pretty scuzzy. It was
gnarly. The only thing there was Florent.
Yeah, Florent, that's right. And Hogs and Heifers was nearby, but it was like very marginal neighborhood. And Pastis essentially catalyzed the gentrification that forced it out eventually,
Yeah, it became a victim of its own success.
Exactly. And now the Meatpacking District is like a tourist mall. And they brought Pastis back. And so I wrote a piece about that. And to what extent do we need it back? Like, will it be the same thing? The neighborhood is different. The feeling is going to be different.
It can't be. It won't be.
It can't be. And also, in the food world, the conversation has very much moved away from that sort of Eurocentric white male dining. I mean, we've really moved toward, so many exciting restaurants that are about the African diaspora. They're about, Mumbai in Oakland, California was Cambodian food. I mean, Hi in Minneapolis, Celeste in Boston, El Jardín in San Diego. I could name hundreds of places that are really where the conversation has moved. And probably should have long ago, long overdue diversity in the conversation about food in America, and all these stories, Middle Eastern food, etc. And where does Pastis fit in that? Because we're talking about a steak frites place, basically. We're talking about a place that is in itself a gesture of nostalgia for a France that never even existed. And then so rebooting it is nostalgia for the nostalgia for France in New York.
And a time and a place pre-Instagram where it wasn't necessarily about the food, but it was more this mise en scène and to be seen and to see others.
And not stare at your phone. You remember when you'd go to a bar at a restaurant and you didn't have phones? Guess what you do? You talk to people, You'd mingle, talk to people, flirt, joke around, argue a little bit. It's fun. I mean, I have gotten to where lately, this has nothing to do with our conversation, but I just lately have thought I want to get a giant fly swatter, like a really big cartoonish fly swatter, foam, like won't hurt anybody. And I just want to walk down the streets of New York and swat phones out of people's hands. Because there's times you're going down Broadway or 5th Avenue, 7th Avenue, you can't believe it. It just looks like an ant farm. Everybody's got their heads down and they're actually banging into each other. I mean, can it wait I mean, this isn't even a new, fresh observation, but lately it has seemed so overwhelming that for miles, you don't see a single person not on his or her phone. Like, we're doomed. We're doomed. If that,
I know.
Turn it off.
I don't know what it's going to be, and part of that is the old man howling at the moon.
Maybe all of that is the old man howling at the moon.
But I wonder also, where is the relevance of New York City now versus? I mean, it doesn't feel like it did in the 80s and the 70s, the early 90s, and now. We have our 15-year-old daughter goes to high school downtown, which is like a 2-hour drive from here. So we rented a loft in downtown in the Arts District in downtown LA.
Wow!
And Julie and I split the week staying down there. So I live in the Arts District half the week.
I didn't know that.
And I'm feeling like a sense of energy and urgency and vitality and vibrancy in that little neighborhood. That reminds me of, when I was 21 and living in New York. Like, there's something happening down there, and I think it's happening not just with art, but with food. I saw it from your Instagram. It looked like you were down there a couple of days ago or something like that.
Gorilla Tacos. I went to.
Yeah, there's some. Our place is literally across the street from Gorilla Tacos.
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, Gorilla Tacos is
cool.
Transformative.
Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting things happening down there.
Absolutely,
and I see like the epicenter of a lot of these, kind of. The cultural genesis happening out of little pockets like this.
I feel like there will never be another band like Sonic Youth out of New York City. There will never be another Velvet Underground out of New York City. Forget it. It's over.
Yeah.
I mean, the Strokes were maybe the
So
end.
where is that happening?
Pittsburgh,
where is that moment happening?
Denver,
Detroit,
Dallas,
maybe.
Detroit. I was just in Detroit. Is happening.
It's crazy.
So
it's
exciting.
If I was like an artist and 20 years old right now,
move to Detroit.
Yeah.
I mean, and my friend Davita Davison runs Food Lab Detroit in that city, and she is very active in making sure that a sort of sweeping gentrification doesn't change the character of the city too much and doesn't take away ownership and influence and voices from Black owners, Mexican owners. She's there to foster business building and creativity and entrepreneurship for people who live there, who are part of the communities. And it's a beautiful thing to see. I think she deserves a prize, and because the dangerous aspect of these cities having a kind of hipster infusion, is that the character of the city is drained away and the fortitude of the people who live there, doesn't always go recognized, and so what I loved about my trip to Detroit recently is that it seems Detroit driven. A lot of what I saw is local people expressing themselves through food, through music. Yeah. I'm babbling, but I think that it's very simple why some of these cities are vortices of dynamism creatively right now. You can afford to live there, and you can afford to be creative. I went to Dallas for Esquire magazine, and people see on Instagram you've landed. I post something from the airport, and they start bombarding me with recommendations. And a lot of people said, you got to go to Petra. Yeah. You know this?
I know. I've heard of this place.
Yeah. Go okay. On. So somebody, I don't know who it was. Somebody on Instagram said, you got to go to Petra and the Beast. Seriously, make time for this. I Googled it. It looked really interesting. So I made the trip. I was the only customer at 3 p.m. Misty Norris is the chef there. It was Misty and a guy. That was the whole kitchen. I basically ordered the whole menu, which is usually a tell.
Did she know who you were?
Probably. I mean, I don't. I eventually usually just introduce myself after I've gotten going, or I don't use a fake name or anything. So because my role is not that of an anonymous critic, and also I do a lot of reporting with these folks. I interview them too. So, it's after a while, and also I like to do pictures, and it looks weird if you don't explain the context. It looks creepy. So. This food was revolutionary. You really sensed a voice and a vision. The restaurant was built in a converted gas station. Looks like something from Grapes of Wrath. She's cranking music. She's got like anime and cow skulls and all these things on the walls, like her own decor. But the food was vivid and funky with fermented flavors and lots of things she does in a kind of Francis Mallman-ish way with fire. I had never tasted anything like it. I thought that it was like hearing Cat Power for the first time, or hearing, I don't know, a band, NWA, somebody where you hear it and you're like, I've never heard anything like this. This is a vital new voice. And so I included Petra and the Beast in Best New Restaurants. But I also felt, to answer your question, sorry I'm long-winded, but Petra and the Beast could not happen in New York City at this point. It would not survive. Her rent would be extortionate.
She converted like a gas station, right?
Yeah. I mean, she couldn't have this space. I went to Otoño, a Spanish restaurant in Highland Park last night. Loved it. And Teresa, the chef, introduced herself when I was leaving. And I said, in New York City, this space would be like $3 million a month.
Right.
It's gigantic. And got beautiful high ceilings, beautiful kind of murals on the walls. Even here in Los Angeles, obviously a major American city, I don't think you could do what Otoño does in New York. Mm-hmm. The economy has become untenable in New York for a lot of creative people. There are still excellent restaurants, and there's still art happening, but it doesn't have that scuzzy vitality, that it used to. That's
required, that like tension to create something great. I
mean, we have obviously Talking Heads, Patti Smith, the Ramones. I mean, CBGBs couldn't happen now.
Well, none of those people could afford to live in New York.
They couldn't live in New York now. No, I mean, so that's actually an exciting element of my job at Esquire, is going to all these cities because I feel that creative energy. I really felt it in Minneapolis, Philadelphia. A lot happened in there. Creativity will happen. It's like it will out no matter what. Yeah. It is powerful, and all the corporate forces of gentrification will try as they might, but we will always find other places to pop out and make things.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, this has been an amazing conversation, and there's so much more going on here than food. Like, you're almost like a Chuck Klosterman type person.
Oh, that's nice. I like Chuck.
Like, yeah, I mean,
I don't
you
think
have
he
a same.
Likes me, but I like him.
Really?
No, I don't know.
You have a take and a perspective on like culture. That's much more than just food, or I ate at this restaurant.
Yeah, I mean, I started as a political writer years ago. Then for most of my career, I was a music writer. Then I was music and film. Then I was at Details writing about guys, who fix broken sex dolls and stuff. And then I was a food writer at the New York Times for 6 years. And now I'm seen as a food writer. But I actually don't think of myself as a food writer. I just think of myself as somebody interested in people.
Yeah.
And I could absolutely change gears any minute now. I have done it many times, much to the consternation of people in my life. And, the last lines of this book are, it can change, it can change, it can change. And that is on my mind, partly because I'm concerned about health. But also I found myself drawn to other subjects more and more. So we'll see. I don't actually drink much, for instance. Like I do write about drinks as well. And I definitely savor a martini, a good natural wine, whatever. But, I'm not like, I've never been a big boozer, so like that element, like we discussed, of indulgence and a kind of obliteration doesn't appeal to me.
Well, now that you live here at our house, down in the teepee, we're going to sort all that stuff out for you. Yeah.
I put my backpack.
We set it up for you. Yeah. All right, man, I got to let you go, but final question.
Okay.
Where's the best burrito in LA?
Oh my gosh.
Or at least a burrito that I can veganize.
I think you've stumped me, because
really?
I tend to be
How
a taco.
I
know, that's crazy. I tend to be a taco guy.
All right, well, wherever the best taco is probably where the best burrito is. I love
Gorilla Tacos.
I'm more of a burrito guy.
Really?
Gorilla Tacos.
See, the thing with, I'll tell you, I'm a corn tortilla guy.
Oh, see, I'm a flour.
Oh,
yeah.
This is it. We can't make this the last question. It's just a terrible note to end on, that you're a flour tortilla guy. That's like, I've lost
not a big corn tortilla guy.
You. Corn tortillas are the spirit of Mexico. Now, I'm not one of those authenticity fetishists. I'm with Gustavo Arellano on this. I mean, to me, a flour tortilla,
I don't know who that is, but
he's a great writer for the LA Times and stuff, and he's a brilliant dude. He wrote a whole book called Taco USA, and he argues against that enshrinement of certain things as authentic Mexican food and other things as not. And he says like Tex-Mex and burritos or San Diego fish tacos, things that are a little bit of a hybrid and a little bit of appropriation even, are as authentic an expression of Mexican cuisine as anything else.
Okay.
I appreciate that. That said, the kind of...
You're a traditionalist.
I like the chew of a corn tortilla. I like that, like particularly when it's a really well-made one. So, I mean, I went to Gorilla Tacos yesterday with my friend Franz, and we ordered probably 10 tacos, like 10 different types. And I guess I had a breakfast burrito this morning, I will tell you, but that's all I'm going to say about it. I wasn't that into it, but God, let's see. You know, there was I feel I'm so embarrassed.
I mean, I'm looking for like the kind of hole in the wall.
Yeah, burritos. It's all about the mission in San Francisco.
Yeah, of course, I know that in San Francisco.
Yeah, because then they griddle them. That's the other thing. Like a lot,
and they're massive.
Yeah, but I don't need them to be massive. I like them to have that sear from the grill, so they fold it all in and then crisp it up on the grill, and all the things melt and merge inside. That's what makes it work. So it's sometimes just about technique. I also like panuchos and sopes and like all the different kind of forms of tortillas and stuff like that. But oh man, I guess there was a place in like Rosemead, California. This is typical of my high school years that we found some really great burrito place that was just far enough away that we could get there during our lunch break at school, order a burrito, and race back and make it to class in like a minute. And we would do it because these burritos were so good. And I cannot remember the name of the place.
Wow.
That's embarrassing.
Shame on you.
I know. It's really embarrassing. I mean, it was like 16 years old. But my best buddy in high school, Rich, became a chef for a while. He was a chef in Paris and in London. I'm not in London, excuse me, in Los Angeles. I don't know why I said London. And Pasadena. And he eventually, it's hard being a chef. It's hard working online and everything. He eventually went to business school and worked at Williams-Sonoma. But we were really into food. I mean, we were like the proto-foodies as teenagers. We didn't call it that, obviously. We didn't know what it was.
It's weird. It's so interesting that you had that and you kind of moved away from that and found your way back to it.
Yeah. I loved restaurants when I was a kid, though, because, some kids are like theater geeks. They love theater. They're just entranced by it, which is a beautiful thing. For me, restaurants were like theater. I would love, like, I remember the Mandarin in San Francisco, Cecilia Chang's Chinese restaurant. My parents we'd go up to San Francisco from LA and just almost explicitly to go there. Like, my family was really into Chinese food, still is. And, Spago. I mean, at a certain point, my dad was doing pretty well. And I remember going to the original Spago and just thinking it was magic. And not because of celebrities and stuff, but because of it was up on the hill and it was just to me, it was just sexy and elegant. And I've kind of an addiction to that. And it's all different types of restaurants. Esquire Best New Restaurants, I included a carnitas place in San Antonio where you can get out of there for $10. But the other places are really fancy. To me, it's just like, how does it make you feel when you walk in? Right. Which is me dodging the burrito question.
I know. I'm still like, there's a 20-minute answer and no place to go for my burrito.
I'm so embarrassed. Jonathan Gold is mocking me.
You're going to think about it, and then I'm going to put it in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll think about it. Does Guisados have burritos? See, I always get tacos there. But anyway, you wouldn't go there because that's...
Yeah, no.
Meats and stuff. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I'll go to I like Holy Guacamole on Main Street. It's just a dive, but I think the food there is great. Yeah. I like little places like that.
Yeah.
And actually Trejo's Tacos is not bad.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty good.
Do they have some vegetable options?
Yeah, they have like a jackfruit taco you can get there and jackfruit burritos.
I'm all about jackfruit.
Yeah.
I really am. I've become a convert. I made a vegan jackfruit bibimbap from... I know nothing about sports. Who's the quarterback of the Patriots? Famous
Tom Brady.
Yeah.
Wow, you really don't.
No, I really don't. No, I know like LeBron James and Tiger Woods, and then like nobody. So like Tom Brady had a meal kit. He may still have it. That's vegan.
Yeah,
with Purple Carrot, perhaps, like one of those
Purple
companies.
Carrot, one of the meal delivery
and I did an Esquire article on meal kits, and they got this bibimbap one with jackfruit, and you had to roast the jackfruit. And, dude, it was delicious.
Good, right?
It was great.
Nice.
I mean, I hate anything from Boston, so I don't want to like celebrate this, but I must say it was a very delicious bibimbap, and I felt very good. So anyway,
shout out to Purple Carrot.
I can't. I'm ending. I was going to end on this burrito I don't know, and now I'm ending on a Tom Brady reference. What's happening to me?
I don't know. We better end it now. All right, man. I got to let you go.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
That was great,
Thanks
man.
a lot.
That was super fun. No, I really enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it.
You feel good?
Oh yeah,
all right?
yeah. Just take out all the dumb things I said.
No, we're not editing any of this.
Oh
man.
shit.
The book is Hungry. Jeff's easy to find on the internet.
Too
your
easy.
Name on Instagram, and I mean, you can just go down the rabbit hole on. You can find all the articles he's written on the New York Times, Esquire, I know there's a lot of stuff in your garage, but there's a lot of stuff online too.
Yeah.
So check him out, enjoy it, and pick up the book, man. I'm digging it.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks a lot. Thanks for
man.
the time.
Come back and talk to me again.
Okay, tomorrow since I live here.
Yeah, that's right. Peace. Plats.